Oh, okay, so it's a good afternoon from me. It's a bit chilly, although it has been colder than this, so hence why I'm wearing the beanie and the snood because I miss my long hair and it's cold. Obviously, Everton looking for a new manager. Frank Lampard has now been relieved of managerial duties at Goodison Park. Marco Bielsa and Sean Dyche are leading the race to be appointed as the new Everton manager. So we'll see what happens with whoever replaces Frank Lampard and who they get in. I think Everton are staring relegation fully in the face at this point. And make of that what you will. But that's a lengthy spell of mismanagement at the club from the board and the ownership. Um, I wouldn't say Frank Lampard is a terrible manager. He's a young manager. He's learning his trade, but I think it's definitely he was put in a position with a club that was clearly not the right fit. And yeah, his reputation's taken a bit of a hit. But the club itself is not well run. Then we look at Sky Sports' decision to not continue with Johnny Herbert and Paul di Resta in their commentary and presenting team. Sky Sports has faced a fair bit of criticism alongside a lot of other broadcasters with some of the lineup changes that they've implemented in more recent times. Now we don't know the reasons why Sky decided not to continue with Paul di Resta and Johnny Herbert. I think Johnny Herbert is a bigger loss than Paul di Resta personally. Paul di Resta is still very busy in his motor racing with a lot of different racing formula that he's contracted to. Johnny Herbert is a little bit more part-time racer, more full-time commentator and a media personality these days. So I'd be interested to see the decision making behind Sky Sports and Johnny Herbert not coming to a contract extension or renewal and what the reasonings are for that. There is speculation he might have been sacked. There is speculation that it's personal reasons until um, Johnny Herbert or Sky come out and state the reasons why. We just have to assume Sky Sports have decided to freshen up their lineup. This does happen. I'm not against new commentators coming along and other commentators, if as long as they leave on good terms. Moving on to pastures new, we've seen it with multiple broadcasters where they've decided to switch broadcasters, for example, yet they're still involved in broadcasting. Like Mark Pugach, for example, moved from the BBC to ITV here in the UK. We've seen it in North America as well, where a broadcaster will move on from one broadcaster to another in the sports sphere of things and continue. So it's not unheard of, but we don't know if the reasons behind that decision. We shall see what happens. Obviously, there's further rumours linking a potential sale of Manchester United and or a potential sale of a stake in Manchester United. Same with Liverpool as well. There's strong rumours there, but again, speculation is a very dangerous thing and a slippery slope to go down. And so, until anything formal is all put forward, we have to assume that yes, any owner will be looking for any investment from someone new to buy a stake. And in the past, we've seen football clubs in this country be on the stock exchange. In the UK, with Newcastle and Manchester United in years past, they have been listed on the London Stock Exchange, so they are public companies where you or I could buy shares in them, should we so wish. But again, regardless of how Manchester United are doing in the FA Cup, the League Cup, and the league, and they are doing much better this season than in more recent seasons, the fan base is still not overly happy with the Glazier ownership. They've never been happy with the Glazier ownership. That has been a long running protest movement, and when the side's doing well, the media doesn't report the protest movement. It's become more public since the side has struggled. Um, and obviously we have FC United out of Manchester as a result of that protest movement. Very similar to the AFC Wimbledon video that I did earlier today in regards to fan protest movement, not happy with the direction the club is taking, not happy with the ownership, not happy with the league, whatever it was. And AFC Wimbledon was born in 2002. 2 years later, Wimbledon Football Club moved to Milton Keynes, and the rest is history. So FC United of Manchester and the Glazer out campaign is not a new thing. I think they gained a lot of momentum from the AFC Wimbledon story, and realised, hey, we're not the only club out there that's dissatisfied with direction ownership has been taking. Um, Now we shall see what happens in that regard. Obviously, we've got the FA Cup fourth round this weekend, which we're really looking forward to. A lot of matches to look forward to, a lot of games. I'll have to cherry pick. I can't watch them all, so I'll have to cherry pick the matches that I will be covering. But a lot of games to look forward to in the FA Cup fourth round. I might even do a fourth round FA Cup preview, which would be quite interesting because I do think there's some very interesting head to heads. There's some very interesting matchups, and I do think there's the potential for a lot more cup shocks, a lot more cup shocks. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Obviously, there's no more replays at this stage. So if it's tied after 90 minutes, we go to extra time, we go to penalties. So that creates another dynamic. And this may be one of the last seasons we ever see FA Cup replays as well. I've been saying that for the last couple of years. Obviously, the COVID pandemic has definitely sped up the extinction of the FA Cup replay. So we'll have to see what happens in that kind of sphere. And I think a lot of strong teams will be put on the field this weekend. I think clubs want to get the ties done on the day in 90 minutes rather than having that extra time and penalty shootout risk there. I think some of the Premier League and Championship teams will put out very strong sides this weekend, which will be refreshing because for so many years we've seen weaker sides put out and a lot of squad rotation, which is not necessarily a bad thing, giving some youngsters or some fringe players a bit of game time, but hopefully we don't see mass wholesale changes for teams and they actually do put out the strongest available starting 11 and the strongest available bench that they can. Um, Obviously, that's something to discuss. Obviously, we do know obviously the Champions League format most likely will change in 2024, and I'm not overly enthused with the format change. A friend of mine, my mate Rob, came over yesterday morning for a little bit for a cup of tea and a quick catch up. And we were discussing the Champions League format changes and how it would, if that was another sport like basketball, for example, or ice hockey, it would work perfectly, or netball, it would work perfectly fine as a format. That doesn't work for football. So we'll have to see if there's any tweaks that UEFA do to the Champions League format proposal. It's basically European Super League. With some tweaks and bells and whistles added to it. The legacy coefficient, I'm not a fan of. We were listing the amount of clubs that have made European finals or won European finals that currently aren't as competitive or haven't been in Europe for a while. And it makes a mockery of that legacy coefficient because basically bang average sides would be making Europe while more successful teams or better quality teams are missing out. It's a flawed system. I think the UEFA coefficient already has caused enough problems for European club football. And there's a lot of distrust between fans and the direction that UEFA is taking the European club game and fans more globally, and FIFA's direction of the international game as well. There's definitely a breakdown in trust that has been brewing for quite some time between fans and the governing bodies, more regionally and globally, especially with football. But we'll see what happens going forward, and we'll see how it all pans out. Obviously, we've got the NHL All Star Game weekend coming up, and that's down in Florida, so that's looking kind of. I'm liking the jersey designs. I would love to get my hands on one of them, but they sell out pretty quick. Ice Hockey World Champions League has downsized from 32 teams to 24 teams. Sometimes less is more, and you get better quality and therefore more competitive matches. I don't disagree with that. Sometimes less can be more. But when you're trying to grow the sport to a more global appeal, that sort of you've got to balance growing a sport and making sure that the teams that are there are as competitive as possible, so we don't have these massive blowout scores and we get really close competitive matches that means the talent is more evenly spread out and the quality is spread out. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. We'll have to see how that plays out. Obviously, down the line, there could be cost-saving measures in there as well to maximise as much revenue as or profit as possible and reduce operating costs. There could be a whole host of reasons why that decision has been taken. Um, there's obviously economics to consider as well with the current economic climate. That was brewing before COVID anyway. There was an economic slowdown on the cards. Will have some bearing, especially when you're a lesser international sport compared to like association football or rugby union. Economics does have a bearing in decision making of tournaments and leagues and salary caps. There's always got to be an economic side of things. You've got to balance it. And what we're seeing with the NRL right now is the possibility of the NRL having a player boycott or player strike. Now, I haven't looked at the 2003 NRL player boycott yet. I will be doing a video on that. Um, Maybe this evening, possibly, but I will be doing a video on that over the weekend. And maybe tomorrow would be a good time to look at that. And again, very similar issues were raised: league minimum payments, CBA negotiations. Very, very similar issues were raised 20 years ago that are being raised now. Obviously, the salary cap was a lot lower back then. The salary cap is much, much higher now. So players are getting paid more, but then the cost of living is different. Inflation, exchange rates, all these things are different. So the economics has changed. But I think the NRL have handled this situation quite poorly, considering how flexible the NRL has been over the last 3 years. I think this is the biggest test of Peter Volandi's and Andrew Abdo's governorship, leadership in the game since 2020, since the COVID pandemic shut the sport down for 8 weeks. I think this is the biggest test that they faced. Is um, and we'll see how negotiations continue if they do, and if the players do strike. Now, the players, RLPA, the players' union, has basically said they're more likely to down tools and strike during the trials matches. Obviously, clubs have been in pre-season training anyway, so the players are already getting up to fitness, getting up to speed. Those players that have been injured are rehabilitating quite well. We don't know if this is going to impact the All Star game. We don't know if this is going to impact the World Club Challenge. Yes, I have heard that Scunthorpe United has had a takeover, and their position in the National League is quite precarious. They are struggling. Maybe could be the fresh impetus to get them out of the situation they're in. Oldham Athletic are in a similar situation as well. But yes, Scunthorpe United are in a very precarious situation, as are a lot of other clubs. And again, part of the reason is the COVID pandemic, but also really bad ownership. And then you have to ask the question of the directors' test that the FA, Premier League, and Football League has in place, the fit and proper persons test, which is clearly not up to standard, not up to scratch. I think clubs need to be audited on an annual basis. And so what we end up seeing is a failure of the system over a lengthy period of time. Hopefully, Scunthorpe United can stabilise. If they do go down to the Conference North, so be it. It might have to happen in order to rebuild and come back up. But this is a situation the club should not be in at all, and this is down to Peter Swan's ownership, and I don't know enough about the situation to pass comment, but they're not the only club which has had to deal with really poor ownership over a significant period of time. And yeah, the playing squad wasn't good enough, and we can all you can say that the team they put together wasn't good enough for the level they were playing at over a significant period of time. But then that does come down to who's signing the checks and paying the players and appointing managers. And that, at the end of the day, that comes down to the owner, is the money man. The situation the club finds itself in, it should not be in the situation. Um, and again, that then puts more spotlight on the governance side of the game and the ownership model we have, or the ownership models that are because there's multiple ownership models, but the ownership model that Scunthorpe United have or had, and a lot of other clubs have had over the last 2-3 decades. There's been some very poor ownership, and this is not unique to Scunthorpe or Oldham. It's not unique to one particular club. It's there are multiple examples of really shocking ownership. And then you go up to the Premier League and you look what's happening at Everton. You look at the situation at Manchester United. Now, yes, they're at different ends of the league, but the situation is very, very similar. With there's a clear breakdown in relationship between the fans and the owners, and then you look at the ownership structures and are they the right ownership structures to have? And then you look at examples like Exeter City, which were in a very poor situation financially. They have been badly run. The fans take over. And Exeter now is one of the few clubs that regularly turns a profit every year, always has a budget surplus. With that budget surplus, they end up redeveloping their little ground of St James's Park down in Exeter. Um, so we'll have to see what happens in that regard with Scunthorpe United. It's not a it's definitely been a very, very badly run situation, but then you have to look at the governance side of the game. And this is where the Football League, in the first instance, and the FA, questions have to be asked um, of their governance of the game. And these questions will keep being asked on a regular basis. So many clubs have gone into administration, been badly run. The Derby County situation a year ago, springs to mind and how that was handled. Yes, the Chelsea situation last year was unique. Was unique, but we'll see what happens. Yeah, look, I mean that is a potential outcome. It may happen. Boston United is a club that I want to look at because there was some dodgy ownership about 20 years ago that ultimately led to Boston United being in the position they are now. But yes, potentially that is an outcome that could happen. It's not necessarily the end of the world if they end up in Conference North. They've definitely got the fan base to actually make money at that level and bounce back. But you look at the clubs you've listed there, that is quite a damning indictment of us. And a lot of those clubs were badly run. And unfortunately, that's the situation we find ourselves in. Is the FA as the main governing body, and then the Premier League and the Football League, and then the various non-league governing bodies have allowed so many clubs to be badly run and run into the ground, or dodgy finances, as in Boston United's case. You end up in this situation. Rugby new rules going to destroy the game. I think rugby should close shop and join American football where the money is. Um, the RFU and the French Union as well as have trialled these lower tackling techniques and rules. The funny thing is the statement that the RFU released yesterday, which I read on Twitter. They did release it on their Twitter feed, and they also released it in full. There was a much lengthier media press release. They're now doing the consultation after making the decision, rather than consulting with coaches, players, the education system, because obviously it's played at schools as well, the sport and community clubs. I think the RFU have mishandled this situation. Yes, I totally agree with lowering the tackle height. I was always taught go for the hips and the belly, go for the gut. If you're going to go for a head-on tackle, the crest of the badge, the sponsor, and the hips. Drive into the belly, nice and soft, and you'll dislodge the ball that way. Yes. Um, but I've been saying this for years. The scrum area is a mess. The scrum laws are a mess. They basically allowed poor tackle technique to be coached into the game. Um, Very poor tackle technique to be coached into the game. And then you get the rise of the gym monkey, as I call it, the overuse of the gym to bulk up. So when I was finishing my time at school and before I started playing amateur level at a grassroots local club for a while, my younger cousin was being basically told to bulk up, bulk up, bulk up. He was like 15, 16 years old. He then spent a year not playing on his gap year, and he had health issues because his muscles turned to fat, and his they were concerned about his cholesterol levels, the potential for diabetes. He's the same height as me. He's double my weight, so um, he was in a precarious health situation. He had to completely change his diet. He had to completely change, and he hasn't played rugby since he was a teenager, university basically. He then went and joined a university team. and was playing at university while he was there. He hasn't played since leaving university, so he hasn't played for the best part of 6, 7 years, and that is a concern. Is not every young player coming through an academy system or a high level school system which will feed into the professional game will continue playing. Um, I think it creates a two-tier system, which will then create problems that if a young, talented player through the education system or academy, you know, um, goes into the higher level, the tackle techniques are different, the physicality is different. They're going to get, and then tackling on the knees, you're asking for it. I mean, I had many knees to the head. I know we know more about brain injuries and concussion now than what we did when I was playing at school and as an adult in my early 20s. And I've had concussion, I can tell you it hurts. Um, but I think in this country, we could see a mass exodus of players just give up the sport. We could see clubs, run out of members and not be able to survive. They're already struggling as it is. I've got a couple of work colleagues who play for one of the Reading clubs, and they are going to be impacted by this rule change. Um, and so we may see an exodus of players. We may see an exodus of coaches, which then creates a problem further down the line with youth development, grassroots development, and sustaining the elite level. Um, we'll see what happens, but I was always taught tackle between here and the hips is the best one. If you want to do an ankle tackle, that you do it in a certain way where you just wrap and slide down and pull, so you're not near the knees with your head and your head position. I look at some of the professional elite players, and their head position is shocking. Like Lee Halfpenny has got the worst tackle technique I've ever seen of a professional player. I'm surprised he hasn't broken his neck as well as just giving himself complete and utter brain damage. I understand that several profile players had to retire early because of concussion, and some of them have obviously been diagnosed with early onset dementia. I understand that head injuries and injuries in general, we're gonna see broken jaws out of this. We're gonna see definitely knee injuries. With if there is definitely a shoulder to knee contact, we're going to see more knees get injured. I think. At the same time, the governing side of the game, so the World Rugby in general, which is used to be the IRB, and then the RFU or the French Federation or the Irish Rugby Union or whatever, you know, national governing body, they've allowed the community game to be badly run in the sense of, you know, the poor tackle technique. The poor tackle technique is a problem, and it starts at the top. So I understand trying to lower the tackle height and head contact, obviously being, even if it's incidental, accidental, being punished with a yellow or red card or a penalty. Um, I think the way rugby unions going about it, it's not a universal across the board, across all the unions coming together at the World Rugby level and saying, "Well, this is what we're going to do for the lower levels of the game or the university or the education side of things. This is how we're going to govern the game," because you're creating a two-tier system. Um, we could see an exodus of players in the north of England might decide to switch to rugby league. So that could benefit rugby league. We may just see a mass exodus of players giving up the sport altogether. Um, but there isn't a universal, global, ruling. It's being allowed. World Rugby has said we need to look at head rules around head contact. We're going to tighten them up, and they're leaving it to the various unions and federations to figure it out, which is not the way. They need to go, right. Okay, we need to have tackle technique like this for under 11s or under 15s, and then let's say we raise the tackle height between 16 and under 20s, and then and then you have a phase kind of structured level. Bearing in mind, lineouts, you weren't allowed to lift in lineouts till you were 16. So, and scrummaging was different for the age groups. You had uncontested scrums at first, and then when you reached, your teenagers like 13, 14, you were allowed to start scrummaging. So they had some age rules based in there for the sport. Whether they still do, I don't know. I haven't played for so long, but this will then affect the maul. This will affect the ruck area as well. Clearing out. This will affect tackling and open play. They're trying to make the game more exciting. If you have like high proper end to end high scoring games, that'll be exciting for about a month, and then it will become frustrating to watch. It'll become less entertaining if the game is like 50 points to 46. That's not actually going to be great. I understand that. Well, how are you defending your try line then? You might as well just go, here you go. Because naturally, if you're tackling just around the waist, the player is naturally going to fall forward. So you cannot defend your try line. You cannot defend your 22 properly. So automatically, regardless if it increases offloading, which is fun. I love seeing the offloads and that rugby league style of passing and moving play, which is fine. But you didn't always see offloads back in the 90s when the game turned. It's the way the professional game has been governed since 95. I would say about 20 years ago is where players bulked up too much and they became too big. And then you don't really have generic front row forwards anymore. They're all just big blokes. There are some props who could play second row. There are some second rows who could be flankers because they're not as. You've got some number eights who could be props. This is so you've lost the proper hooker. The hooker needs to hook the ball. That's the point of that position in the scrum. They don't have to do that anymore because the scrum laws are a joke. So the front row is all generic, all 6 foot plus, which is not how it used to be. The second row, okay, depending on if you're Devon Toner and you're just ridiculously tall, they're all between 6'5" and 6. They're all still tall, but most second rows can play on the flank and number eight because now the flankers and number eight are also in 6'5" plus. So and some props and front row forwards are 6'2" plus. So the scrum is basically you're all over 6 foot now. Many scrum halves are still the smallest player on the pitch, but most fly halves can play inside or outside centre. So everyone from fly half to fullback are all over 6 foot, generally speaking, apart from a couple of fly halves. And the scrum halves, even a lot of them are over 6. So rugby has gone big is better. Rugby has generally gone bigger is better. And that's around, I would say, about 2005, 2007, after the 2003 World Cup. About that period, the style of play and then what was expected of players to be. You need to be man mountains. When I was playing, I was told every position, every body size and shape had a role in the game. Otherwise, go play rugby league. That was basically what I was told. Is rugby union is a bit more for everyone, whereas rugby league you've got to be a man mountain. You've got to be a bit of a caveman. I prefer watching rugby league now because you actually do have slight wingers who are really nifty on their feet, and the tall wingers. You have that. There is no universal winger. That you've got the halves are still. You can have really big halfbacks who are like 6'6" and some really small ones who are 5'10". Rugby league seems to have gone with everyone. Size isn't the biggest. You know, thing. You don't have to be like a man mountain. You can also be skillful. The World Cup proved that. You can have some slightly smaller, more mobile forwards who are quicker on their feet, ball playing. You knacker out the bigger guys. I think rugby union's gone size is better. It's not. But the rugby authorities have allowed for a long time the game to lapse into this, into what I call the gym monkey phase, as in, bulk up, bulk up, bulk up, and in reality, it's sort of lost a little bit of its core skill set, the core fundamentals. They're trying to, also bring the tackle height down. But if that's the case, just give out lengthy suspensions for head contact. Then players will very, very, and also if a team regularly has players, I believe getting caught for head contact, look at the coaching. Then you have to go, why are you coaching these players to give each other concussion? Because the game has got more physical, it has got faster. The contact area is more brutal, the amount of force going through. But then players are being coached, and I honestly believe this. They're being coached to badly in that sense. The tackle area, the clear out of the ruck, the maul, how you join a ruck and a maul, the scrummaging. You're being coached badly. They're not being coached the rules properly. So it leads to injuries. Stockport County was in the National League North. Yes, it was. Yes, I've done a video on Stockport County. My next door neighbour was a county fan. Look, I mean, a lot of clubs have. I mean, I did the video on AFC Wimbledon. I think their rise from the non-league to the Football League has been fantastic. I hope it's like if Solihull Moors did it last season, that would have been equally as fantastic because they've only been in existence since 2007. So there are clubs that prove you can go through the non-league system quite well and progress. FC United Manchester have done quite well since their foundation as well. So there have been some clubs that have used the non-league pyramid very, very well, and there's been some other clubs who've not adapted to falling out the football league or not adapted to getting out of the non-league pyramid as well, or it's taken a lot longer than anticipated. And you look at the National League and then the National League North and South, and the amount of ex-football league clubs in there adds to the argument. Maybe we should extend the fifth tier as and maybe the sixth tier as the football league structure as well. Um, because most of those clubs are fully professional. The majority of players are on professional contracts, and they're getting paid. Um, but with how the National League dealt with their pandemic payments, I have concerns about the governance of the game at the fifth and sixth tier level. There are concerns. I've watched the documentary; it's very, very concerning. I wouldn't say, going back to the rugby union, I wouldn't say rugby should just close shop and join American football. There's no money in American football in Europe. But it does risk the international path player program that the NFL has in place. We could see some players sign up to that, but we could see an exodus of players from lower levels of the game, which will ultimately impact the elite level of the game. And if you lose the grassroots, you cannot sustain quality, top quality professionalism. Rugby union in Australia is finding that out, that they've had an exodus of players from the game for a variety of reasons. A lot of it's financial and and structural, and they're either playing AFL or rugby league if they want to continue playing sport, or they've decided to leave domestic competition and play overseas. So rugby union is running the risk of having that exodus of players and coaches and fans. A lot of fans aren't happy with it either. The backlash against the RFU's decision and the lack of consultation. I know the French league have tried similar rule changes where they're lowering the tackle height, and yes, making the tackle height safer. Concussions have been reduced at lower levels in the game, but then you've got to get the elite level of the game to tackle better, because they're the role models that kids see, that fans see, and kids want to copy their role models. So people like Owen Farrell need to tackle properly. Because even in rugby league, some of his tackles are classed as illegal and would be 10 minutes in the sin bin. So I don't, you know, that's my opinion on that one. Owen Farrell, he's a role model. His tackle technique is shocking. Lee Halfpenny, he's a great goal kicker. I think he's an underrated fullback and winger, but his tackle technique is absolutely shocking. George North, how many concussions does he need? These are big role models in the game for this generation of fans. Um, and Lee Halfpenny would spend half his time. Well, he does spend half his time out injured, but Owen Farrell would spend half his time in rugby league in the NRL, for example, suspended for head contact. He'll be cited and given, and each ban would be longer because he's had a previous offence in that area. His tackle technique is absolutely appalling. Yes, York City have not had a good time of it since falling out of the football league. They've uh, definitely not adapted well to the non-league structure. They haven't been back, so that's a lengthy spell outside the football league for York. 7 years. But I do like the new stadium they have at York, which was obviously they had it at, which we saw at the Rugby League World Cup. It's a fantastic facility, and it's a shame that it's a non-league stadium. That should be a football league stadium. But again, it is a shame that unfortunately, clubs, either yo-yo between the football league and non-league, or haven't really been able to establish themselves in the football league, or if they've fallen out the football league, can't get back. Um, there are some big clubs with big fan bases in the non-league, which is not necessarily a bad thing for the National League itself. It creates more interest. And when you've got owners like Ryan Reynolds coming into Wrexham, that creates interest as well. And that adds more fuel to the argument that maybe the National League should be merged with the Football League and become one of the fifth tier of the Football League, Premier League structure. And they should raise the level of that because there's more interest now with clubs like Notts County and being in there, and Oldham Athletic, former Premier League club, in there. Because of some of the size of some of the clubs that have ended up in the National League, it does raise the argument: should we raise the status of the National League to, let's say, League Three, for example, and bring the National League structure into the Football League structure? The idea the bottom four of League Two get relegated, and the top three of the National League get automatically promoted. The fourth team get promoted via the playoff. There is also an argument to change the relegation promotion structure from two up, two down to maybe three up, three down, or four up, four down. That is a valid argument that a lot of people have suggested. It's not without merit. Um, but at the moment, that's the structure that the EFL and the Premier League have just, and the National League, as the league structures, have agreed upon with their relegation promotion structures that are in place. That's what's been agreed um, uh, via the FA and the Premier League and the Football League and the National League meeting. That's what they've agreed as a group of leagues and governing bodies. Um, but it's an idea that's gaining traction. Is definitely changing the relegation promotion format or the amount of teams that go up and go down. Um, that's been an idea that's been floating around for some time now. It's not without merit, as I say. I think it is very merited to have that discussion. Um, and a lot of fans have been saying that we need to look at this, and a lot of sporting experts have looked at this. But do you think rugby should close shop and go after the money because all the clubs are running on an operating loss? Not all the clubs are operating on a loss, um, but unfortunately, and this is what August, and I keep going back to this. So pre-COVID, Augustine Peashot was running against Bill Beaumont for the World Rugby election, and a lot of his platform was we need to distribute money more evenly in the game. He was arguing that if we do have salary caps, that the top end talent, the highest paid players, just take a slight pay cut, and then we can pay the lower paid players a little bit more, and we can distribute funds better. And he lost that election, and his words have been proven true. The fact that in England, two clubs have gone bust this season, which has impacted the Premiership. And the fact that the Premiership decided to get rid of promotion relegation for a couple of years, I think, is stupid. It's meant teams like Bath can avoid being relegated and basically punished for being crap. But it does raise. I mean, the club finances aren't in a good state of affairs. We know that there's government money has been loaned and granted to rugby union and rugby league for that matter, but rugby union in this case. Professionalism hasn't worked as well as what was anticipated back in 1995. You could argue the TV deal isn't great. You could argue that the salary cap has been too high for too long, and of course, then you have the Saracens and Leicester salary cap breaches that we know of. We know other clubs have also overspent. Um, and then you look at the dynamic of average attendances, the TV revenue, the TV deal that's in place, um, and you know, uh, there are various economics, but the COVID pandemic hit rugby union harder than football in this country. It did. Football, for some reason, is still, you know, um, has some issues, but the economics for rugby union were concerning before the last World Cup, not just here in England, but in Wales, in Australia, South Africa, New Zealand. So some of the tier one nations are really, there are some alarming signs. But then you look at Major League Rugby in the US, and they've done rather well. The game is establishing in North America and Canada, in the US and Canada at club level. And I can see an exodus of players going over to the US and Canada to play because they are guaranteed a paycheck. They might earn less money, but they're guaranteed to be looked after by the clubs and paid, and they can continue playing in there because we're going to see possibly more clubs go to the rule like Wasps and Worcester, and there needs to be questions asked about again the governance and the financial governance, which clearly has not been there. With Premiership Rugby and the RFU. A lot of questions. Same with the Welsh Rugby Union. The Welsh game is in financial crisis, and before the last World Cup, players were like, "We're not sure if we're going to have a province to go back and play for." Um, and you could argue that, yeah, rugby league obviously has been fully professional in the traditional modern sense. The traditional sense was the players were getting paid from 1895 for their playing services. Although rugby union was still amateur, so rugby league has been a bit more professional. But rugby league's got issues as well, with how much money rugby league is making. A lot of sports have found the last decade or so, and I will say this is not just like COVID. This is the last decade or so, more financially challenging than before the financial crash in America. That's just fact. How football has continued to make the amount of money is beyond me. But I don't think rugby should close shop per se. I do think though that the financial structures and the governance of the game needs to be looked at, and I think unfortunately clubs have been allowed to overextend themselves for far too long, and it's the lure of European competition and the fact that the French system, the salary cap is double what it is everywhere else across Europe, so they can just win at will in Europe. But then you've got to look at the TV deal, how much the TV deal's worth. Then you've got to look at international selection rules. Do they need to be completely relaxed so players can just like football play for any club they want within reason and be eligible for selection for the national side? If rugby really wants to be taken seriously as an international sport, but they have to look at the other international models out there, because in football or soccer you can play in any league in the world as long as you are eligible to represent your country of choice. You can be selected. There is no barrier saying you've got to play your domestic league to play for your country. Rugby league, I know the Australians would prefer you play in Australia, but they've made exceptions where, like, if a player's playing in the Super League, can you come back and play for a couple of tests, please? There's technically no barrier in the way of that. Ice hockey, I know with the World Championships and the Olympic qualification, you can have players playing outside the NHL. You know, cricket, they would prefer you were home based, but some of the lesser test nations will just select players from wherever they're playing in the world. So some of the other big team international sports don't care where you're based, as long as you are eligible and meet the eligibility criteria to represent internationally. I think that's part of the problem is telling players at certain countries you've got to play domestically to play for your country, um, because that doesn't apply to other international team sports, and I think that's causing a problem. We have to look at the value of the TV deal, and then we have to look at how much money or how many subscriptions Sky and BT have lost since the COVID pandemic shut things down. We have to look at how the TV deals are structured, how the money is distributed, and then, yeah, clubs like Ealing and Cornish Pirates, for example, who've been banging on the door to get into the top flight. I do feel they've been unfairly hindered in their attempt to grow and succeed by the closed shop top flight policy that Premiership Rugby took, which is ultimately shot themselves in the foot, because it means clubs like Bath can be awful and have no fear of looking over their shoulder at the trapdoor. And then you had an odd numbered league, which creates a problem because they allowed Saracens back in, and then they shut the door because we can't have Saracens outside in the Championship for too long. That was naughty. I didn't agree with that at all, which has also contributed, which means every weekend there's a bye week. And now that two clubs have gone bust, they've got to get the Barbarians to play a couple of games to make up some lost revenue, which is just the most of the clubs are well supported. That's the but it's the manner in the way they've gone around structuring the league and structuring the finances that have caused a lot of problems. And the last time we were in the situation, Richmond went out of business. They survived as a club, but they went into administration. The only other club I think that's gone completely under is London Welsh. But that was post-season. Actually, in season, a club, hit administration, and their administration rules are bizarre. Unlike football, their administration and rugby league, their administration rules are absolutely bonkers. So rugby union needs to look at a whole range of things, because they're making themselves look really amateur hour when it comes to the governance of the game, the financial rules of the sport, the structures, the governance structures. And then with what rugby union's done with the tackle rules that are coming in from next season, without consulting clubs and players and fans and the education system, you're going to see a mass player exodus that's going to ultimately cause even more problems for the sport long term. And you lose that player base, you lose that fan base. They're risking a lot of fans going, "Well, where's rugby league? We can give that a go." Which might benefit rugby league, ironically. And then you risk the finances to the sport, the income, whole range of things because they're making knee-jerk reactions to situations that were very easily avoidable 20 years ago. And that's down to weak governance at a global and a more local level. And professionalism hasn't worked, and the money hasn't been evenly distributed. Um, but we'll see what how the Six Nations plays out, and we'll see how the World Cup plays out this year, for example. And they look likely to be very entertaining. And then next year or next season, post World Cup, God knows what state rugby union's going to be in. But I do fear for the future of the game. I really do. From where we were in the late 90s, early 2000s, where there was a lot of promising signs for the sport, not only in Europe with the Six Nations becoming a reality, but globally with the growth of the game in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 nations to now. The Tier 2 and Tier 3 nations have done really well. The growth of the game, like South America, North America, and Asia Pacific, has come on leaps and bounds, which is fantastic. It's the Tier 1 nations that are all over the place and are a complete and utter mess, and that's the concern is how have we allowed this to happen where the greed at the top is actually killing the sport, but the growth at the bottom is sustaining it. That shouldn't be the case. It should be more balanced growth across all levels of the sport. And World Rugby has been asleep at the wheel, and the domestic unions have been asleep at the wheel. And Augustine Pichot, I think, has been proven right all these years later. I mean, he left the organisation under a cloud, World Rugby. Augustine Pichot has been proven right with a lot of the things that he highlighted as issues that the sport is not dealing with. And they've been sleepwalking into this concussion. Do you think the paywall TV has affected the growth of all sports? It's definitely had a negative impact. I always believe in shared rights. I think you can balance, you can still make a lot of money out of pay TV and free to air TV because commercial free to air TV is still profitable, it still makes money. But I do think in the last decades, the subscription model with the pricing, it's not the subscription model because I've got a subscription to the NRL, for example, on the website, but I find it's more. And I've got my subscription to the V8 Supercars. I find it's cheaper for me on a monthly or yearly basis to do it that way than buy a massive TV package and then half the sports I'm not watching. I think it's been detrimental to cricket. I think rugby union is now finding out the hard way. I think the Super League, rugby league in Europe has found out the hard way with how bad the TV deal is. Ice hockey's been hampered at times, although the TV deal is getting better for the Elite League, for example, and their social media outreach is getting better. I don't think it's been a yeah. I think the media rights model's got to change. I think using platforms like YouTube, for example, which are completely free, but you can make a lot of ad revenue, I think is a good way to possibly grow sports. Um, Actually, each individual league having a subscription streaming service where all the programming is online needs to be looked at. I think obviously having shared rights with free to air and subscription TV, but a lot of people my age are turning away from Sky Sports and are turning away from BT Sports never really worked. Um, and when we do have free to air coverage, the viewership figures back up the fact that people still, okay, if there's live sport on and it's accessible, they'll watch. If the subscription TV prices were less, I think more people would sign up. But when you're paying for a subscription, you're expecting it to be ad free, and then you're bombarded with more ads on Sky and BT than on free to air commercial TV. So in reality, they're ripping they're ripping you off. But then they're paying so much money to block all the illegal streams. It's the rise of VPNs. I do think how much a month is the NRL and the V8 Supercars? I pay for the NRL a yearly package, but it works out at just over £12 a month, £13 a month. V8 Supercars, £5.99, and you can do it through YouTube. The only V8 Supercar race weekend you can't watch via YouTube is the Melbourne F1 weekend because the F1 package is on Sky. So the only race weekend I don't get to watch on the V8 Supercars is the Melbourne race weekend. But Melbourne as a track doesn't suit supercars and it doesn't suit F1, so it's no big loss to me. It's not a massive loss to me. The Melbourne street circuit, Albert Park. But that's the only race weekend I can't watch. I get everything else. £5.99 a month. That's it. £5.99 a month. Not a lot, is it? So instead of me getting my TV sorted out and and asking my landlord for permission to have a satellite dish and paying God knows how much a month for Sky Sports, which I have no interest in at all. I haven't watched actually TV, and I'm going to state this. I've not watched TV properly, apart from the occasional program using my laptop, for over 3 years. 3 years. There was a period in 2020 when I moved back to my extended family home for 6 months, where okay, I would watch the news and see what the updates were. There was no sport taking place, so it wasn't as if I was missing any sport. Um, I've not watched TV for 3.5 years. I haven't I haven't missed watching TV. The only things that I watch from TV is sport, but most of the sport that I watch is not on free to wear or it is limited on subscription TV in this country. So to me, I'm not really missing anything. Um, and things like the FA Cup, for example, are free to air coverage anyway. Watch that online on the iPlayer or the ITV website. So in reality, I'm not really missing a lot, but I haven't actually watched stereotypical TV. There it is in the background. That's been unplugged since March 2020. That's been unplugged for nearly 3 years. So yeah, in August it's been 3 years since I watched the TV properly. I've watched the occasional thing with my mum on TV when I visit her, but in reality, I haven't watched TV for a long, long time. Um, I don't miss it. Um, the two online subscriptions I have are really, really, really good value for money. I'm not spending a lot of money on them, so I'm not like panicking about the costs. Um, And that's where subscription TV, BT Sport puts the Champions League and Europa League finals and the Conference League finals on YouTube anyway. Um, uh, and that was part of the reasons why they were allowed to have the European games. Was you've got to give something back. Obviously, Channel 4's got a limited deal with Super League Rugby, a limited deal. The Challenge Cup's still on BBC, which you can watch on the website on the iPlayer. So the sport that I watch is already on either. I mean, NASCAR puts all their races on YouTube a few days after the race has taken place, so there's no ads there, so you don't get bombarded with ads. So in reality, I'm not really put out by it, but I do think that the online streaming services, so online website streaming services, are a way to go to reach a wider audience. The 1830 demographic, or what they call the 1830 club for the tour, the tour promoters in Ibiza and Mallorca and Falaraki and all that, which is basically the age demographic of 18 to 40. They're turning off subscription TV in larger numbers. Obviously, the cost of living crisis, even those more targeted, the stereotypical socioeconomic groups that would have the disposable income, so our parents and grandparents, are looking at cancelling certain subscriptions. Um, and I think they've got to adapt. And I do feel that the rise of VPNs is a response to basically price gouging because companies like Sky and BT here, and then you look at some of the other networks in like the US and Canada or on continental Europe, Australia, some of their pricing is ridiculous. So there's pushback, and you can get a heavy fine and prison sentence for illegally streaming. Like, okay, but if companies like Sky B, which is Sky, and BT Sport, which used to be ESPN in this country, Eurosport, for example, if these media companies were actually to have more reasonable pricing, they would find they would actually have more subscribers, which would mean they'll make more profit. But they've overbid. You see, this is where things like the Premier League and in Australia, the NRL and AFL, the TV companies have overpaid for the product. But then the leagues themselves have gone, well, we got away with this lot, and we're going to see a plateau. That's why Amazon, for example, has entered the Premier League kind of side of things. Now, I'm not a fan of Amazon, really, for a variety of reasons, and I have my concerns about that. With Amazon entering the broadcasting side of things. Um, I do have my concerns about Amazon, but there's a reason why Amazon has entered the domestic sports market, rightly or wrongly, and that means we've lost the autumn union internationals, for example, which I think is quite disgraceful. But and there was a threat that we could lose the Six Nations off our TV screens, free to air, which again, you look how much they're charging though in continental Europe for TV rights. It's a lot less. You pay a lot less for your Sky package or your whatever the broadcaster of note is, because Setanta, used to be broadcasting here in the UK. It's still a going concern as a name, at least as broadcasting satellite TV in Europe. It costs a lot less per capita, so you have to work out the average salary. It doesn't cost as much for an equivalent economy like Germany or Scandinavia, where you have a similar salary, average salaries and stuff. Their TV cost is a hell of a lot cheaper, and there's a lot more sport on free to air coverage. They've got the balance a lot better. Um, The pay-per-view format for like boxing and MMA, not a fan of that, especially if you're already paying for a subscription service like Sky or BT. And in ITV's case, they come with ITV pay-per-view. Yeah, because ITV Digital worked so well 20 years ago. So that that has an impact. What new sports leagues am I going to review this year? I might have a look at the V8 Supercars in a little bit more depth. I just watch casually as a fan. I don't. I love the V8 Supercars, but I might do that in a little bit more depth. Um, and because there's the Gen 3 V8 Supercars, I might do a video on that and my thoughts on the new regulations of cars. I do hope that more manufacturers join the V8 Supercars, because just to have Ford and Chevy, to me, they obviously tried with Mercedes and Nissan and Volvo, but I would like to see like BMW, for example, and possibly Aston Martin enter the V8s, because they do produce V8 cars. Um, BMW could definitely do quite well. Wouldn't mind seeing like Alfa Romeo or someone like that, or some of the European manufacturers enter the V8 supercars. But at the moment, as it stands, they've only got the two manufacturers signed up, but the rules do state, and the regulations, in the old regulations and the new ones, they are open to having new manufacturers enter the V8 supercars, which will make it more competitive and more fun. I think the 2015 season and the 2014 season as well were two of the best seasons we've ever seen. Um, some fantastic drivers have raced in the V8 supercars, including some XF1 drivers and British touring car drivers have raced around Bathurst and given the V8 supercars a go. It's the I think for me, alongside the British touring cars, the V8 supercars is the top touring car series in the world, much better than DTM. Although they are going to the coupe style of car reg with the Gen 3, which is a bit more like DTM, which we'll see how that plays out. I miss the old saloons, but that's the direction the sport's taking. I am looking forward though to the new engine package, the new aero package, the new rules. The cars are going to be harder to handle. We could see more action, so that's kind of fun. Um, Other new sports leagues? I don't know really. I might look at the Gaelic Amateur Association sports and do a piece on hurling and Gaelic football and have a little look at them, which would be kind of interesting, just a bit, just for just historical purposes and just my own interest. Um, I could look at some more sports team histories, especially outside the UK. I think I could look at teams in North America. We could do more NHL content. We could delve into a bit more depth into Major League Baseball and look at the various ups and downs that Major League Baseball's had in the last 30 or 40 years with all the player strikes and lockouts, and then revisit each one and go and look at the reasons why. Um, we could look at certain things to do with the NFL, like could there ever be the possibility of London hosting a Super Bowl? Um, we could definitely do some more content on the MLS. We could. There's lots of options. Lots of options that we could have a look at. Um, but at the moment, uh, we'll see how the year pans out. We'll see the direction the channel takes. Obviously, this weekend we've got the FA Cup fourth round, which I'm really looking forward to. We could see more managers get the sack. I know I didn't do the Frank Lampard video. I fell asleep. I've been so exhausted lately. As I said in my mental health video, I've really been struggling with my sleep, and then there are some days where I am just not not I wouldn't say mentally, but I'm just so tired that even if I was in a better state of mind, it's difficult because I've got some time off work at the moment, so I've got a 5 day weekend, so I'm a bit more refreshed with it. Um, well, I actually didn't know that Frank Lampard had been sacked until I got in from work Friday. So I woke up Friday morning and I didn't see anything on the main news websites that he'd been given the chop. It's when I got in that like, oh, who do they go for Marco Bielsa? Do they go for Sean Dyche? Someone else? And I'm like, what's going on here? Um, but the Everton situation, I could definitely do a video looking at Everton's situation since David Moyes left. So looking at Everton since 2013 and breaking down their league finishing position every year, managerial appointments, um, I mean, look, they've had I think a manager a season. It works out at they've gone through managers quite. They've never there is no stability at that football club. So that makes it really interesting. Um, and they're the latest in a long line of clubs this season to decide a managerial change is the way to go, and that's totally fair. I mean, I don't like seeing managers getting sacked when they haven't been given very long in a job, like Appleton at Blackpool, for example. He's been given the job. Cardiff are on their third manager of the season. I don't like seeing that. But if a manager's been at a job for 2, 3, maybe 4 years and it's not working out one season, I can see it. You know that I can see as acceptable. They've been given a bit of time and it hasn't worked. Lampard's case, he's not been there very long, but the club have gone backwards. Is that on Lampard or is that on the situation that he's found himself in with where the club's at? I mean, there is no managerial stability. Um, the club has not been, you know, in contention for even an FA Cup or a League Cup for a long time. They've only made 2 FA Cup finals in my lifetime. Won one, lost the other. So they've not been close to silverware since 1995. Since David Moyes, they have chopped and changed manager on a yearly basis. And in the history of the channel, they've gone through managers like there's no tomorrow. Rafa Benitez and Ancelotti, two very successful managers couldn't get this team going anywhere. Although Ancelotti, I was very surprised with how short his tenure was. I thought he would stick around a bit longer. Clearly, there were things happening behind the scenes that we just don't know about. And obviously, he left and went to Real Madrid, which is obviously his choice. But that was very interesting that they hired him in the first place. Then Rafa Benitez, with the Liverpool connection, it is what it is. I could do a history of the 9 original MLS clubs still in existence. Yes, I could. That could be kind of fun. Um, very, very. I could definitely do LA Galaxy. That will get a lot of views. FC Dallas, Sporting, Kansas City, San Jose. The San Jose Earthquakes is an interesting one because they predate the MLS. And the Bay Area is crucial, and California, the West Coast is crucial to the development of a lot of sports in the US that seems more European or Australasian. So rugby union, rugby league, and association football. California is a very important location for as a stepping stone for developing, you know, the modern international sports. Without California, and to a certain extent, Florida and New York State, without those, and Texas is a key component. Without a handful of states, the MLS doesn't work, Major League Rugby doesn't work, and any attempts to grow rugby league don't work. So I can look at the San Jose Earthquakes and look at the history of them. I can do more content on the MLS. That will be a very interesting, very interesting bit of research. So I've got to get the new notebook. I've nearly finished this notebook now. Uh, Uh, I've gone through so many notes. When was my first? So when I first started using, so the first video I did using this notebook was the Leicester Tigers were getting fined for the salary cap breaches. So that's got to be in the last 12 months. Then the Fenway Sports Group video that we did, and so yeah, last season's FA Cup, third was it third round or second? I know it was the quarterfinals of last year's FA Cup that we started using this notebook. So less than a year, and I've already finished it. So that's mad. Um, but no, yeah, absolutely. I could definitely look at the club histories of the original nine, and then we could look at each individual MLS franchise and look at their successes, their failures, and some of the records that players have for appearances, goals, you know, managerial appointments. But because the MLS is a very different kind of um, different league structure to the European leagues, I'd have to approach structuring the video in a different way. But I also want to look at the NHL teams as well. I want to look at some really bad NHL seasons. So I've done the Washington Capitals horrific season. I could look at the Buffalo Sabres tank for McDavid period, um, and how bad they were that year. They were bad. And I could also do some more NRL content with like looking at each wooden spoonist basically, because the Western Suburb Magpies video was so much fun to look at, and the North Queensland Cowboys in their early days weren't much better. So I've got to look at every wooden spoonist in the NRL era. That will be a lot of fun, a lot of fun. And the Newcastle Knights have some shockingly bad seasons in there. And I want to do a video on the New Zealand Warriors as well because they've never had a wooden spoon, but they've and they've never won a grand final. Although they appeared in two, and why the New Zealand Warriors can't be more successful. That would be very, very interesting um, to look at the reasons why the New Zealand Warriors are as you know mediocre as they are. So there's various things I could look at. There's some various ideas that I've got floating around. I might do some individual like player profiles. I could do some look at some coaching careers like Brian Clough. Start with Brian Clough would be a fantastic place to start looking at a sports coach, looking at his coaching record. Um, so there's some ideas for stuff in the future to look at. But at the moment, I'm just want to get the FA Cup fourth round out of the way, and then go from there. There are some very interesting sports stories that are currently happening. Um, and things that are going on domestically. And then over, and of course, then we've got the build up to the Super Bowl and all that. California has been a great contribution to soccer. There's a couple in the USL Championship: Monterey Bay, Sacramento, Oakland, San Diego, and Orange. Yeah, no, without California, um, and to a certain extent, Texas is a very important state in the US for sport. Without certain locations, certain sports don't get a foothold in the US and Canada, but in the US and grow, and that is rugby union and the MLS. It just doesn't succeed, um, and then they are very important states for the growth of professional sport outside the big four professional leagues in the US. Very very important. Um, we Mikel Antonio may leave West Ham in this transfer window. He has stated there is a possibility he could leave. Um, he has confirmed that he's been in contact with other clubs. So Mikel Antonio may leave West Ham. So that's would be a big blow for West Ham if he was to go this season with them struggling. But he's confirmed that he's probably on the way out, which is interesting. You rarely hear that of a player saying, "I might leave in this transfer window." Uh, it's going to raise a lot of speculation about his position. Um, there's been something's happened in Spain with Vinicius Junior. Fans have well It could be Atletico fans have hung an effigy of Vinicius Junior from a bridge near the Real Madrid training ground. Atletico Madrid and Real meet in the Copa del Rey on Thursday, and Atletico said the incident was repugnant. The Brazil international Vinicius Junior said last month that the Spanish league had to act on racism and racist attending games, so there's a big issue there. Before the Madrid derby in September, a minority of Atletico fans sang racist songs aimed at him as they entered the Metropolitano Stadium before Real's 2-1 win, which the club condemned as unacceptable. Spanish prosecutors closed an investigation into the chants 3 months later, saying it was impossible to identify those responsible. Earlier this month, the Spanish league said it had filed charges relating to the abuse of Vinicius Junior to the relevant judicial, admin, and sporting bodies. La Liga on Thursday said it will press for an investigation by relevant state security forces and bodies into the effigy and banner and will seek convictions for those responsible and request the most severe sentences. Atletico stressed that while the rivalry between the two clubs is the greatest, so is respect. They added, no individual, whatever their intentions or colours, can tarnish the coexistence between different supporters. It is everyone's responsibility to avoid this. Such acts are absolutely repugnant and inadmissible and shame society. Our condemnation of any act that attacks the dignity of persons or institutions is categorical and unreserved. We do not know the perpetrator or perpetrators of this despicable act, but their anonymity does not avoid their responsibility. We hope that the authorities succeed in clarifying what happened and that justice helps to banish this type of behaviour. So, yes, Copa del Rey quarter final. There's been some rather unseemly stuff there. Oh, Forest Green Rovers have appointed Duncan Ferguson as the new manager. Ian Birchnell left. They're bottom of League One, so that's interesting. That he's been appointed. Whether he can keep them in League One is another thing. They're really struggling. The women's football, your English clubs have dominated. English clubs have dominated international spending in 2022 in both women's and men's football. That's an interesting thing. Joe Linton has been fined £29,000 and banned after drink driving. So, football players still being absolute morons. Juventus, obviously, 15-point deduction, and and they are in serious trouble. Right. So football regulator, new football white paper. So this is government intervention in sport with strong action for clubs due February. A long-awaited football white paper, which is when legislation is brought forward to be discussed in the Houses of Parliament, which will include strong action for club owners and directors, is set to be released by the government in February. The white paper will propose a series of reforms to shake up football, including the ensuring financial security within the professional game. Plans were initially due to be released by the government last summer, but were delayed due to the change of leadership within the Conservative Party. There's been a fan-led review with a regulator among 10 recommendations. So we shall see what happens with that. Lamucci is linked with the vacant Cardiff City job. Sunderland skipper Evans to miss the rest of the season. There was a boy who was attacked at a youth football match as he has an eye socket fracture. Betty Lempus, a Kenyan road runner, banned for 5 years over doping. So there's that. Can GB win the bobsleigh title in the World Championships? That'd be fantastic if we could do that. Bradley was not content with breaking new ground as the first bobsleigh pilot to lead British team to European title. Okay, we won the world title. Good. Right, so Bielsa, Dyche and Rooney are all linked to a potential appointment at Goodison Park. Personally, I think Sean Dyche or Wayne Rooney are probably a better fit with their experience than Marco Bielsa, with the style of play that they will be implementing and how they've approached previous managerial appointments. So I would be very interested to see what happens there. There's obviously the Welsh Rugby Union's under a lot of pressure over its handling of sexism and intimidation and bullying within the organisation. As the Welsh Rugby Union chair, Ewan Evans, says he will step up an external task force to examine accusations of sexism, racism, misogyny, and bullying within the governing body. Steve Phillips will remain in place as the Welsh Rugby Union chief executive. We definitely need a football fan that would be the money spent is ridiculous. And the only director's testing is to prove absolutely. So I'm just reading some of the headlines there. So I'll do a video on the Duncan Ferguson Forest Green Rovers appointment because I think that is very, very interesting as it's his first managerial appointment. They are bottom of League One. They're not doing very well. But yes, the fan-led review and the government white paper. Now, how a white paper works, basically, you can be a backbencher or you can be on the government benches. You can propose legislation, and that's called a white paper. That's the initial reading. It will then go through several phases of parliamentary scrutiny, and it may or may not get passed as law or not. There could be a vote. There'll be a vote. Do we pass this as law, or do we reject this as law, or do we send it for a further state of scrutiny? It will have to go through the House of Lords a maximum of 3 times. They can scrutinise it as well. But in reality, there'll be a vote in the House of Commons at some point on whether to adopt what the government is proposing or reject what the government is proposing. But obviously, this is obviously in response to the European Super League, obviously debacle, the Derby County situation as well that we saw. Obviously, Bury, I think, ultimately sparked calls for a fan-led regulator all those years ago. 3.5 years ago with the collapse of Bury. There's obviously been growing momentum behind fan discontent with how the FA is running the game, how the Premier League and the Football League are running the game. There's growing. The fans don't trust the authorities. The fans don't trust their club owners, and there is growing momentum. And with how the European Super League disaster was handled two years ago, or a year and a half ago, the momentum has gathered pace at an accelerating rate, and the fact that in the last 3 years we've seen clubs calling for a salary cap, we've seen funding models questioned. We've seen a breakdown in trust between the Football League and the Premier League. We've seen a breakdown in trust between all the clubs and the FA. There's a significant lack of trust with UEFA, and there's division within the game about how best to regulate it and how to govern it. But yes, the owners and directors test, the fit and proper persons test, is not good enough. And yeah, how they continue to break transfer spending is just head scratching. Considering other sports like rugby union, for example, are on their knees. Like, I do not understand how football over the last since 2007 2008 has continued to spend the ridiculous amounts of money it spends. And it really is mind-boggling. And then we see the situation that some high-profile clubs have found themselves in financially. And then we see what's happening with Juventus, and then we have to ask the question, quite rightly, well, who's governing this sport? Because we've been told there's financial fair play that UEFA has set out. That's clearly being flouted. We've been told that there's an ownership test for potential buyers of a football club. That clearly isn't. That doesn't work. And now we're seeing clubs on the verge of going out of business when the sport itself should be very, very profitable. No club should ever be in the position it's in. Professional sport should actually be ultimately one of the most professional, most profitable industries in the globally. And it does make a lot of money, and there's a lot of money spent. But then we see all the negative sides of professional sport with all the allegations against individual players for some of their criminality, for example, and some of the antics they get up to and stupidity they get up to. And like the Mason Greenwood and the the Edward, is it Edward or Benjamin Mendy? Yeah, Benjamin Mendy situations with their legal entanglements, Joelinton with his drink driving, Hugo Lloris a couple of years ago with his drink driving. And then we see the managerial turnaround and how much money is spent in compensation payments for managers because they've been sacked during their contract. The amount of waste in this industry is ridiculous. And then we see clubs getting into financial difficulty because they're owed money by other clubs. Like Bordeaux, for example, in France, is owed money by Barcelona. Still hasn't been paid. They've been waiting 3 years. They basically went to bankruptcy. Um, but there's a lack of trust from fans with the governing bodies, and there's growing discontent with fans and owners, and the direction the sport is taking under the current ownership that we have. And it's not just an English problem or a Scottish problem, or look at Italy's case, Juventus with their corruption scandal. There is a widespread problem within the game of a lack of transparency, and that includes player agents. The transfer market is obscene. Player wages are obscene. Um, no, really, the player wages are obscene, and not in line with other professional sports that seem to have a well-paid individuals but more realistic wages. When you look at other sports, and I don't know where the sport is getting all this money from, because and where all the money's going, because look at the clubs that are in financial difficulty. You have to ask the question, where's all the money gone? With what was claimed back in like 2016, 2017, 2018 about how we can let fans in for nothing or less than £10 into grounds. We don't need to charge 200, £300 for a high price ticket. We can let them in for next to nothing and still make a massive profit. Well, clearly that was a lie, because within 2, 3 years we had the COVID pandemic, the shutdowns, and they're screaming for handouts from the government and the furlough scheme. So honestly, I this is where my cynicism and in regards to the professional game and the sport as a whole come from. And then we look at the state rugby unions in as well. That's not much better, and they have had government handouts at the top tier level. They have had COVID loans. They've been given tax exemptions, and clubs are going bust. So there's definitely something's gone horribly wrong. There is a lack of transparency in sports ownership. There is a lack of transparency, especially with sports agents, and how salaries are structured, and how there's workarounds around the financial rules to get round, via third party payments, third party agreements on sponsorship and ownership. And then we see how toothless the regulators that currently in place are. Um, Football cannot govern itself. It's proven. Rugby union can't govern itself. It's been proven. Um, and then we look at the other sports scandals that continue to rear their ugly head, and athlete and player behaviour is constant. It doesn't matter what the sport is. There's always going to be some high-profile athlete getting done for assault, drink driving, more serious offences, as we've seen with uh, Mendy and Mason Greenwood, for example. Steroids, cheating, corruption, and look at snooker. We haven't even mentioned snooker today, and the fact that ten players are currently suspended pending investigation into match fixing and taking bribes. I mean, there is clearly some sports have got too much money floating around and not enough accountability, transparency, and other sports are struggling to get by. But however you look at it, there is not enough accountability and transparency, and then we have to ask questions about uh, strong governance versus weak governance. Unfortunately, I think certain sports like in this country, like football, there's too much money. There is too much money in certain sports. I think the TV deals and how they're structured need to be looked at. And as we were discussing earlier about how um, uh, pay-per-view TV or subscription TV has that model seen better days, and is that model on the way out? Um, the fact that now there's government involvement or political involvement in trying to regulate professional sport is concerning, because we tend to like to keep professional sport and politics separate. That is concerning. We've seen a rise in uh, politicisation of professional sport during the COVID pandemic, which again is quite a troubling turn of events that I'm not overly keen on. So there's definitely things that are discussion worthy at the moment, that are are clearly big talking points. Yeah, I'd rather not get um, too stuck on this particular point. We know it's happening. We know in February that the process of legislation begins, and we'll see what amendments are made to that legislation and how many of the proposals are actually set in stone to actually take place. And then we'll have to see the club's response. We'll have to see the owners' response because not all the owners are in agreement with this. There's a lot of them, predominantly in the Premier League, who are very resistant to the idea of an independent governing body, an independent regulator for the sport. And a lot of those clubs are foreign owned. A lot of them have American money in them. So there is that resistance from a handful of clubs in the Premier League, predominantly, to an independent regulator in football, which is very interesting. And those clubs tend to be the ones with foreign money in them. So we'll see what happens in that regard and go from there. Um, but yeah, but let's talk about something else because I don't want to get bogged down in the discussion about a fan-led football regulator. I understand why that's been raised. It is a talking point. It's been a talking point for a while. But as I said in the AFC Wimbledon video, like the fans were like, "We've had enough of being ignored. Our concerns we've raised, they've not taken us seriously. We'll set up our own football club." Um, and that's why I think the Football League will never again, and the Premier League as well, will never again relocate a club outside of a community because the response all those years ago, and I think that setting up of AFC Wimbledon gave the Man United fans who were protesting against the Glazers impetus to set up FC United of Manchester in protest again at the fact that the owners were running roughshod over them, not listening to fan concerns, the structure of the ownership, the structure of the takeover, and that even though the club was still successful at the time and won a lot of trophies under the Glazers, look where the club is now and the rebuilding process that's been put in place. And fans were quite rightly proven right, and they set up their own football club. So the the seeds of this, you know, independent regulator go back 20 years, 20, 30 years. The seeds were sown then and have built in momentum over a very long period of time. And then we get to a point in 2019 with Berry, and then we get a point with Derby and Chelsea. Different reasons last summer with Derby and Chelsea, but in between, in that period, the European Super League has reared its ugly head. And yeah, there definitely needs to be. Look, whether it comes to pass is another thing. It might get defeated in Parliament. We may not see legislation brought in, but the fact that a white paper is now being published is going to be very, very interesting. Then we'll see, obviously, what happens going forward. But I think this could be one of the reasons why some of these American owners are trying to sell shares or sell up because they realise they're going to have to abide by the rules or face heavy penalties, and their business models don't allow them to abide by the proposed rules that are in place because they don't want to. And that's quite interesting that some of the clubs that are resistant to this regulator have either stated they're either open to investment, so someone buying a stake of the club off them for some liquid capital, or a potential full sale. So Manchester United and Liverpool, who have been regularly criticised by fans with their ownership models and the owners. Um, their own fan bases have criticised them, and fans in general have criticised the American style model of ownership. Um, so that's an interesting talking point. But I'm open to other questions and other topics and other things being put forward because I don't want to get bogged down in just talking about the football regulator and the, the the and the sport in general. There's a lot of topics that I'm interested in discussing, and there are things going on. Like who? Well, we could argue who could be appointed the Everton manager. We could discuss that. We could discuss the fact that Duncan Ferguson has got his first managerial appointment, admittedly at Forest Green Rovers, and we all laugh at the club and go, "Well, it's the glorified pub team of professional football." But they have hit their first setback under Dale Vince. they've hit their first setback. They are struggling. They are really out of their depth in League One. Um, and they're facing relegation to League Two in the face. Now that's very interesting. And they've also another club that's proposed building a new stadium and moving as well. So that's quite interesting with some of these clubs that are proposing stadium refurbs and rebuilds and moving and things like that. They're struggling. That's interesting. But no, I've also been really happy with the responses to the history of rugby league videos that I've seen, like USA, Canada, and now Jamaica. Really happy with the feedback from them, and the surprise from some fans going, "What?" You know, and some viewers. Also, the video I did of things that I've learned whilst being a content creator on YouTube. Some really interesting feedback on that. Some interesting comments on there as well that I will which I've addressed in due course, and they're kind of and the feedback from that has been fantastic. Um, because I didn't when I started, I didn't have that self help guide to how to create content. And in the last couple of weeks, since hitting 1,000 subscribers, some of the videos I've done haven't been sport related. So the mental health and addiction video and the things that I've learned as a YouTube video, I thought, well, these are very important discussing points and the feedback has been fantastic. The comments and the support has been fantastic there. And also, if you notice how I've now structured the live streams, where you've got to be a subscriber to comment, you've got to have subscribed for a certain period of time. We haven't had to use the moderators to kick people out of the chat for a while, which is fantastic. So I took a cue from some other channels that had issues um, with people spamming the chat or leaving offensive messages in the chat, and I thought, hang on a second, I don't use this feature. I know it's there, but I'm having a bit of a I'll give it a go, and that's being adaptable. That's learning. But I didn't have a self. There is no perfect way to run a YouTube channel, and people keep saying to me, "I should use thumbnails." Well, I like to keep things simple. That's something I've learned from personal experience that suits me is keeping things as simple as possible. Less things can go wrong. And I and when I look when I'm eligible to get the Teespring shell from the shop, then yeah, I might come up with a better logo and some funky slogans and some designs that could be kind of interesting. But no, I like to keep things simple. Less things are likely to go wrong. I don't use the whiteboard anymore really because I actually use that for more mundane paperwork stuff where I've got a magnet where I keep all my holiday forms and other bits and pieces and bills and all that on there. But I don't use the whiteboard anymore for the channel. I didn't mind using the whiteboard, but the lighting in my apartment isn't great, and I would have to completely rejig and move things around. That it'll take far too much time to set up, and therefore I'll be making less content. So there you go. But no, I'll be interested to see what other questions people have, so other topics, because the things that I've enjoyed doing are the history videos. I do. If you guys continue to like them, I'm more than happy to keep making them, and they're kind of fun, and they're actually getting really decent viewership figures on them. A lot of them are people are still watching the Port Vale one, which I did at the beginning of last summer. Um, but that's one of the more popular history videos. So the history content, I'm more than happy to keep doing the research on those moments. I can revisit certain particular seasons, so I'm always open to any particular season of a team that's done really well or really badly. Look at their record, key moments when they sack managers, when they hire managers or coaches, if there's a takeover, things like that. Revisiting certain moments because there are some key turning points in the history of sport that have occurred that I can research. I like doing those history videos. They're kind of fun. They're kind of fun because they age well. Whereas the match reviews of individual matches, they don't necessarily age as well because once the match is done, we move on, and it's a snapshot in time that has a brief hit, and then no one's really interested in that anymore. So the history videos and looking at key moments like the NHL lockouts, for example, the Major League Baseball lockouts and player strikes, they age well because they've happened in history, and we can discuss the reasons why and what happened and what caused the situation and what was resolved out of the situation. So Always got content ideas. Always got content ideas. So I'm always open for any potential content ideas. Like there's like the history of the football league video that I did way back when at the beginning of earlier on last year. Um, God, that was some really fun. Yeah, Port Vale, Sunderland, Nottingham Forest, doing all those videos midway through last Ipswich Town, Birmingham City, uh, even some German clubs like Kaiserslautern, Bradford City, Swindon Town. That's quite a popular history video. I've done histories on Oxford United, Norwich City, West Brom. There was something to do with the Lacazette transfer, Newcastle United, Chelsea, Leeds, Aston Villa, QPR. The QPR video hasn't done as well when it comes to club histories. The QPR video, really surprised by that, hasn't done as well. And, it's I'm a bit frustrated with that one. But Southampton did quite well when I did that video. And then you've got that I discussed, and then I've done Grimsby. That's quite a popular football club history video. I did some Johnston, so some of my Scottish club videos have been quite good. Okay, so Ernie Stewart has departed the US Soccer Federation and returns to the Netherlands to join PSV Eindhoven. Yeah, it's very interesting when you've got the next host of the World Cup having structural changes, obviously within their management structures and direction that they're taking going into the next World Cup. It's going to be very interesting to see how both Canada and the US national setups, the structures that uh, uh, they put in place over the next 3 years, 2.5, 3 years, leading into the next World Cup. Yeah, I've done a few transfer videos in the past. To be honest, a lot of transfer videos would be more speculation, and I don't like doing speculation. I like looking at facts. So yes, Mikel Antonio coming out and saying that he's very likely to leave West Ham before either on transfer deadline day or during this window in the rest of January at some point and he's been in contact with clubs, is not a good sign for West Ham. That a high profile player at that club is saying, I'm looking elsewhere at this point, says to me that David Moyes and the board may have sort of lost the dressing room a little bit and the direction the club's taking. If a player like Antonio is saying, I don't feel like this is working for me, I need to look at my options elsewhere. I have done transfer videos in the past. I mean, the Neymar transfer video when he joins PSG from Barcelona is one of the reasons why this channel is a sports channel. As I discussed in my last the two non-sporting videos I've done recently in regards to mental health and in especially in the 9 things I've learned as a YouTuber. That was one of the first. I think that was one of the first sports videos I did back in 2017. One of the first, and that mega transfer has completely changed the climate and the atmosphere around transfer spending. That was, I think, either the first or second sports related video on the channel. I'm not happy with how I presented that video, but I'm happy with the fact that I discussed it. If I was to do that video again, I would do it completely differently and with a lot more confidence. But that was one, I think, the first or second sports video that I did, and I was like, "This is madness. This is obscene." I actually said at the time, "This is an obscene transfer fee. This is an obscene amount of money." And to me, what? But now looking back on that transfer, and I've discussed that transfer to death in live streams, and when other things happen with football finance, like the European Super League, for example, the warning signs about Barcelona's finances were there then, and that's in 2017. I remember as a kid that I was always told by many that Barcelona were one of the few clubs not to have sponsorship on their shirts. They didn't need it. They didn't want it. Cultural and societal reasons and for fun. Didn't need it. Right? The warning signs were there when they started having sponsors on their jerseys, but we didn't see them. We didn't acknowledge that in the last decade or so, clearly Barcelona were overextending themselves. It and then obviously we find out the Neymar transfer, and we're all a bit, hang on a second, this is mental. Um, do I think QPR's situation right now is down to managerial problems? Personally, you want them back in the Premier League, but I can't see they have ownership. Ownership. They have spent so much money under the current ownership that they are basically in breach of financial fair play. Um, they've not been they've made some poor managerial, you know, appointments, but at the same time, look at the amount of money that's been spent at QPR under the current like Fernandez ownership kind of group, and the various owners and shareholders that are in it. They have spent a lot of money over a significant period of time, and they could never establish themselves. It's ownership, which then leads to the managerial appointments because they're the ones who want to obviously go. We want to be a Premier League club. Let's get there, and we've spent a lot of money. We've spent a lot of money. We want to be in the Premier League. Um, they're one of the clubs that financial fair play is looking at. And there are several financial rules that are currently exist in English football, like the profit loss rule. So your losses can not exceed profits by 135%. So 100% being, you know, zero basically. If your profits are basically you're making a loss and it's exceeding your income, if your outcomes are exceeding your incomes, your outgoings are exceeding your incomings, and it's more than 135% of whatever your budget is, um, you can get docked points. And there's a 10-year time frame. 70 clubs are in basically in breach of spending rules, basically the various spending rules under financial fair play. About 70 clubs in the Football League and Premier League are technically in breach. QPR is one of them. QPR is one of them. Yes, they have had benefited at times from the parachute payment system. That only lasts for a short period, which plugs some of the lost revenue gaps. But at the moment, I don't follow club football as religiously as I used to. Even with this channel, I don't follow as religiously as I used to. Um, but I can look at QPR's league position history and go, how many seasons have they been a Premier League club since 1992? Not many. Um, how close were they to winning more silverware than just that solitary League Cup? They had a couple of seasons where they were close, and they didn't take their opportunities way back when. But I think you can look at several reasons why they're not a Premier League club right now, and a lot of it's to do with ownership. They're the ones who appoint directors of football. They're the ones who appoint the managers. They're the ones who then appoint the coaching staff and the scouting and the youth policy. The buck always stops at the top. People writing the checks and structuring how a club is structured behind the scenes. A lot of reasons why clubs aren't successful or are having issues is to do with off field issues. Any sport, what happens on the field or on the ice or on the court, you might have a great team, but then off behind the scenes, like the Edmonton Oilers were successful in the 80s and they last won the Stanley Cup in 1990. It was behind the scenes that things were going wrong, and they were still winning in spite of the fact things were going wrong behind the scenes. They managed to win another Stanley Cup after they got rid of Gretzky because they couldn't afford to keep the team together. They traded into the LA Kings for players and cash because the owner was a crook, and there was financial issues. And then we see the exchange rate between the Canadian dollar and the US dollar fluctuate, and it become almost ruinous to run teams in Canada. So we see Quebec, Winnipeg move out of Canada. Um, and it's not because the fans weren't there; it was because it became financially unviable to continue operating in those markets with the costs attached. Um, with Wimbledon and the crazy game, ownership was the problem. Hence why they were Milton Keynes, and they got the new AFC Wimbledon. Um, Manchester United, a lot of their issues actually come from how the club is structured off the field. And yes, the team on the field isn't as good as the team under Ferguson. We all can all agree on that. But they've chopped and changed manager. They've had some very successful managers in position there that have, not succeeded. And you look at the structures off the field with with how the Glazier ownership works, and then the structures below that, and then you get to the manager. And at the moment, it's Ten Hag, and he seems to be getting momentum. We had this under Solskjaer, he finished second. We had it under Mourinho. We had it under Van Gaal. Moyes won the Charity Shield in his first competitive match. So we've had these managers who've done really well at other clubs. And people go with Solskjaer, oh, we only coached the Norwegian League. He won silverware at another club. He comes in, gets the European final, finishes second in the league. You can't argue with that's not a bad return, considering he was an interim and then he was brought, and given the role. Um, I think a lot of the problems with QPR is the ownership side of things cause a lot of the issues. They've chopped and changed managers so many times at QPR over the years that you can't get an identity. Um, I will say this: Loftus Road is my favourite stadium I've ever been to. The atmosphere at Loftus Road when it's a sellout is fantastic because it's such a stadium where you're all on top of each other and it's an intense little atmosphere. I mean, it seats about 18,000, but it feels like you've got double that capacity with how tight you are to the pitch. It's a fantastic little stadium, and it is a shame that QPR aren't a Premier League club. It really is. But how many London teams can you get in the Premier League? I mean, Christ, there is the thing called market saturation, and the QPR again have got to compete for that youth talent. They've got to compete for the fan base as well in a very congested sports market, which also will have a contributing. I know the away end isn't perfect. It is awful, but you're not meant to really. You want to not give your away fans, the away fans a bit of an advantage or the away team an advantage. You want to make it an unpleasant experience for the travelling team. Because if the travelling team's away fans go, oh, this away end's lovely, we're going to make ourselves comfortable. They're going to be more positive, aren't they? You want to make it an unpleasant place to travel to as a team. You want to make it uncomfortable for the opposition and their fans. You don't want to be a nice day out. And I always found Loftus Road, yes, the stadium could use some improvements, absolutely. There's no doubt on that. But they are constricted with the space they have around Loftus Road. And it would be a shame if QPR ever left Loftus Road, but I can see at some point in the future a new stadium build or a complete rebuild of Loftus Road. I hope it doesn't lose its character because that's one of the stadiums that's got a lot of character and intensity there. It's a real intense little stadium. It's one of the things I miss about Brentford and Griffin Park was that was an old school stadium. It just wasn't very good. I mean, I've been to Vicarage Road. I've been to what was the Medeski, which is now the Select Car Leasing Stadium, so the Medeski. In Reading quite a few times. I've been to St Mary's a lot. Some of these modern bowl stadiums, to me, lack, especially the Medeski and St Mary's, they lack a lot of atmosphere and quirkiness. Stadiums like Loftus Road still have those quirks and those and yeah, we can say that the away end isn't good enough. We can all agree on that. It could be better. The facilities could be better, but there's character around Loftus Road. There's character with Fratton Park in Portsmouth. There's character with St James's Park in both Newcastle and Exeter, depending on which club you support. There's some of these older stadiums that have got character, and some of these modern like stadiums, like the Etihad, like what was the Medeski, like St Mary's, they lack a bit of character and quirkiness that their predecessors had, like Main Road, the Kipax. I mean, come on, you can't replace that. You cannot replace that. And the replacement for Goodison Park may look fantastic on the 3D renderings, but I bet you it lacks the quirkiness and the atmosphere and the history. It will lack the history, but it will lack the intensity of Goodison. It will. It's just fact. The Riverside and Stadium of Light, yes, they're fantastic modern stadiums, but do they have the same atmosphere as like the old Ayrton Park, for example? Probably not. Um, uh, so be careful what you wish for. I like old school style stadiums, even if they're modern, but they've made modern adaptations to them. The old school style, like a Bramall Lane or a Hillsborough or an Ewood Park or a Turf Moor over a soulless bowl like St Mary's. And yes, we can say to a club, you could possibly invest a bit. The amount of money QPR have spent, they could have invested in the stadium and made it a better fan experience all round. But then you lose a little bit of that quirkiness and intensity in the atmosphere. It's just you've got to be a bit careful with over modernising a little bit too much and making it too fan friendly, especially for the away end. I mean, you want the away fans to have a bit of a you know an unsettling experience. You want the away team to have that unsettling experience, but yes, you want the facilities to at least be decent. Personally, I've never had an issue at Loftus Road. I don't mind it. But I do agree it does need a little bit of renovation. But again, QPR are limited in this with where the stadium is in the site space. I understand why Tottenham did a rebuild of White Hart Lane, but was it actually truly necessary? Because they haven't won anything. They spent a lot of money and won nothing, and are mediocre still. I like what Liverpool have done with Anfield, and they've done it in situ rather than completely demoing Anfield and changing it. They've done it bit by bit as they see fit to go. We'll extend the stadium in this section. Same with Manchester United. I know the Glazers are regularly criticised for how they've maintained Old Trafford, and maintenance leaves a bit to be desired. But again, how Manchester United have with Old Trafford over the decades gone, we'll add to this stand, we'll add a section there, we'll improve the seating here, rather than doing a full rebuild. Well, I understand why Arsenal did move from Highbury to the Emirates. The Emirates is a soulless stadium. It's a fantastically modern stadium, but you're too far from the pitch. It's a beautiful stadium, but I think you are a little bit too far from the pitch, and it does lack a little bit of atmosphere and quirkiness. Whereas Stamford Bridge and Craven Cottage, for example, as two other London clubs, you're more close to the pitch, and you've got more of an old school vibe to how the stadium is designed and laid out. Um, Especially Craven Cottage. I'm not as keen on Stamford Bridge. I understand the issues that Chelsea have with a potential, you know, continuing to expand or redevelop with some of their issues surrounding the stadium. But I'm more of a fan of Craven Cottage than Stamford Bridge. And then you look at the Valley at Charlton. At least they've got a bit of space to expand should they need to. And then you look at the new Den at Millwall, better than the old Den. Still an intimidating atmosphere with how they've laid that stadium out. Then you look at Selhurst Park. I mean, that is a old school stadium and a half. That is, and that is a very intimidating atmosphere at Selhurst Park. Um, you don't go there, you know, um, as an away fan, you know, looking forward to the day. You know, you're in for a tough atmosphere, but it's one of the iconic grounds of South London. Um, but there's still more club histories for me to do, and there are other channels who subscribe to this channel who look at who do a lot of stadium reviews and look at the history of stadiums, and they do a very very good job on that. But yeah, no, there's definitely um, scope to look at more transfer window videos, but a lot of the transfer news is pure speculation, and then a lot of the transfers I'm like, who's this player? How he's paid for? They paid how much for him? I'm like, eh. I don't think for me the transfer market. Yeah, I could do transfer videos, but for me that's I'd rather do managerial appointments and managerial sackings because for some reason they seem to do better. They do. And I will be doing the Duncan Ferguson gets appointed Forest Green Rovers manager because that's his first managerial appointment. I will be looking at the Everton managerial situation because who do Everton get? I mean, when Eddie Howe was appointed Newcastle manager, people were going, "Oh, Newcastle, even with all this money, they're going to struggle." And look how he's turned that team around. What national team do I support? In what sport are we discussing? What sport are we looking at? Because rugby union, I like to see the Irish and the Italians do well. Rugby league, I just sit back and watch. I just enjoy watching rugby league. I prefer it at club level rugby league, but rugby league internationally, I just sit back and watch. Uh, England, when it comes to football, frustrate me. So I always choose a second nation for a tournament. I always go, I want to see this nation do well, that nation. I always pick a nation before a tournament starts to go, I want to see this team do well. But I like to see Uruguay do well because of the population size. I like to see Croatia do well as well. Um, but I don't really support a national side. I just like watching international level sport because it's one of them where you see the best players in the world. Um, honestly. And when Germany beat Canada in the 2018 Winter Olympics, that's one of the most in the ice hockey. That is one of the most popular videos on the channel. It is when the Germans beat the Canadians 4-3 in the Olympic ice hockey semi-final. That is one of the most popular videos on the channel, and that was 5 years ago. Still gets views today. People still view it today and leave comments. And oh my god, there are some comments on that video. Um, well, look, I was born in Germany. I spent a lot of time in Italy. I mean, I know the Germans when it comes in a footballing sense. The last three tournaments, they've really struggled. I did actually pick Germany as my favourites to win the 2018 World Cup. Yeah, that prediction aged really badly over the last 5 years, but I did put 2018. This is why I don't do predictions. I predicted Germany with my pick for the 2018 World Cup. I'm never doing. I'm never doing a prediction ever again. Women's football. I'm really looking forward to the Women's World Cup this summer. I'll try and watch as many games as I can, but of course the time zone difference is going to be. I'll have to cherry pick the games I'm watching there, but I'm looking forward to that. But no, when it comes to international sport, obviously I want to see some of the lesser nations improve and do well. And I always pick an underdog. I always pick an underdog to go. Actually, let's see how far this team can take their run. So Morocco, for example, I was like they could actually do this. They could do a Greece. Um, yeah, I thought France would struggle this time around. They didn't. Obviously, ultimately they got to the final, but I did think France would actually ultimately struggle in their attempts to retain the World Cup title. But for some reason, the French have not have been pretty consistent, and I think it's a lot to do with the coach, not the players. I think the coach Deschamps is a pragmatic coach. Um, but no, Spain and Germany and Italy have all really. I mean, Italy obviously won the last Euros, so they've had a bit of success. But Spain and Germany are not. Yeah, Spain I think overachieved at last year's Euro. I think they got lucky at last year's Euros. They didn't play particularly well. One game where they scored. Same in this World Cup. Spain one game where they scored a handful of goals, and in reality couldn't do much. The coach is gone. Germany, Oliver Bierhoff in the structural off-field side of things, in the player development and his role with the federation, he's been the fall guy. Hansi Flick has kept his job. How I don't know. But Germany and Spain have got to look at themselves and go, let's see what. Yeah. Look, to be fair, France England at that quarter final, whoever won the game would have been like, okay, we got away with one there. We ultimately lost, so we're having to go at the officials. The French weren't overly happy with the officiating either. Let's be honest, that game was so badly refereed. Both sides could have easily put forward concerns about the quality of refereeing. So, but no, Harry Kane didn't help the situation by thinking he was playing rugby league or rugby union, really, and gone, I've watched the Rugby League World Cup last month. I'm going to score a penalty here. Um, um, but no, Spain are flattered to deceive. Spain aren't as good as what people think they are. And they're and I'll let everyone put their predictions in. I mean, I had no predictions for this World Cup whatsoever. None. Absolutely none. 2018, I was, looking like a bit of a. Thankfully, not a lot of people watched that 2018 prediction video. That I didn't get a lot of views on that. Thankfully, because I could have been left with a lot of red, very red faced. But in reality, I don't do predictions because in order to be very successful in doing predictions, you've got to be in on the fix. You see what I mean? Like I don't do sports predictions because Germany, yeah, Germany. I was like, they're not going to get out of the group. Spain, they're not going to win. Like some of them have sort of come to pass. Others, you know, what I've learned on this channel in a sports kind of concept, I was not expecting Brisbane to get a wooden spoon, the Brisbane Broncos in the NRL 3 seasons ago. Was not expecting Anthony Seibold to be sacked as quickly as he was, and I wasn't expecting him to get a wooden spoon. Um, so that's something that we could not predict 3 years ago. If you're a rugby league fan, could not predict that. The fact that when Gareth Southgate was appointed, nobody had any idea that he was going to make, a semi-final, a final, and a quarter-final in his first three tournaments, and that he would still be in charge all these years later. We could not predict how. Okay, yes, we haven't won anything with him, and there have been criticisms over squad selections and style of play. But the Euros, when we get to the final, I was predicting a group stage exit. We make it all the way to the final. And yes, we fluffed the final and we lost that from a winning position. We can all agree on that. But no one was predicting that. No one was predicting how well we did in that World Cup in 2018. We've got, oh, it's the strength of opposition. Look who we're playing against. We still did better than the previous tournaments, so there's progress. And we can all agree that teams like Belgium have underachieved and were absolutely shocking in this last World Cup. Germany have been shocking for a while. Spain have flattered to deceive. They've got away. They've had some easy games where they pumped a team by 7 or 8. So was it Slovakia at the Euros and Costa Rica, and then they yeah, what, really? So and then look, we've had the debate about the Nations League format, and is that the right way to the direction to take the international game? But Gareth Southgate, people are still debating Gareth Southgate now. I mean, I think possibly, yeah, he should have gone on after this tournament. I think that's as far as he can take the group. But the style of football we were playing was better than at the Euros. The style of football we're playing has evolved, so we're getting better on a footballing standpoint and the style of play and how attractive we're playing the game. And we are playing to our strengths. But then we got to look at players like Jordan Pickford, the team he's playing for. Is he really going to be England's number one for the next tournament or the next set of internationals? Can Southgate really justify picking Pickford because he's not on form? And that's the pressure. I think that's some of the mistakes Southgate's make with his statements, and he contradicts himself, saying, "I'll pick players on form and reputation." So he's got to go with Ramsdale. He has to go with Ramsdale um, or Pope, for example, in the next couple of games. He can't go with Pickford if he's talking about form because Pickford's form has been atrocious. The fact the team he plays for has been atrocious is another thing. You know, so we'll see what happens there. In regards to like Belgium and Roberto Martinez now being the Portugal coach, I mean, that's an interesting one. Like, I'm surprised Lampard was even appointed manager of Everton, for example. So there's some things we just cannot predict. And I will. There are some video ideas I've got, and I will look at some further content later this evening about uploading and discussing things. But still, there's no managerial appointment at Everton, and that is a very interesting thing. Whereas Forest Green Rovers, they've clearly sacked the manager yesterday. They've appointed the manager today, so they've obviously had a. I know it's a lower league club, but they've obviously got a plan. Everton, what is the plan? Because Bielsa, the style of football he plays, Everton will finish bottom, and their goal difference will be one of the worst we've ever seen. Sean Dyche, I think, for me, is the perfect fit. Although Wayne Rooney didn't have actually technically a bad record with Derby, considering the points deduction. So for me, I would go with Sean Dyche. I would let Rooney still learn his trade in America. It's their off season, so or their pre-season, so he'll be assessing his players coming back into training camp and looking and just figuring his squad out. And to disrupt a team like that would be highly unprofessional. But I would say Sean Dyche is probably the best bet to at least stabilise Everton in the short to medium term, and then you look at changing things. But if they go with Marco Bielsa, they might as well relegate themselves now. But again, there doesn't seem to be a long-term plan. They've sacked a manager and gone, well, we haven't got a replacement lined up. Whereas Forest Green Rovers, okay, a lower league club, 2 leagues below, similar situation, relegation fight. They've gone, okay, this is not working, mate. We're going to move on from you at this point, and they've already got their backup there. Their next guy lined up to slot in to go, right, this is the guy to take us forward out of the situation we're in. So Everton, I don't know what Everton are doing. I cannot see any kind of direction with that club, which is why they are where they are. Like Chelsea and Liverpool, they've fallen off a cliff this season. Chelsea also got a new owner. They've sacked a manager this season. Some of their transfers haven't panned out. They were in a transition phase anyway from last season, even without the ownership changes and the situation they went through last summer with the potential points deduction and the asset freeze and the uncertainty surrounding Chelsea's operating license, that kind of helped. Liverpool, they've just not really performed this season. So is Jurgen Klopp under pressure? I mean, there are some big, like, what kind of unexpected performances. And then you see how Brighton are playing under new management since Graham Potter's left. You see the resurgence Newcastle have had under Eddie Howe, which has been fantastic. Arsenal top of the league and comfortably clear. Man City, the possibility that Man City may win no silverware this season. None. I mean, can you imagine Man City winning no trophies this season? Then you have to ask the question about, well, how long is Guardiola going to stick around? You know, you have to then ask the question, how long is Guardiola going to be in charge of Man City? Because some of his statements this season, they're not mind games. They're the sound of like a guy who's got bored of his position and got tired. So there's a few things we could discuss, and some video ideas. But again, a lot of those video ideas that are bouncing around here are pure speculation. Um, and I think with Everton, I think they should go with Dyche, but I can see Morshy going with Bielsa, and I can see the club going down the pan, and then God knows what would happen to Everton if they got relegated. That could be catastrophic, um, absolutely catastrophic if they were to get relegated. I think it could be worse than a Leeds United situation if they were to go down the size of club that they are. Um, I wouldn't say Everton suck. I think at the moment they've been completely mismanaged on an ownership side of things. They've had no managerial stability since David Moyes. That's a decade of chopping and changing who's on the touchline. Their transfer policy is a scattergun approach. They're not producing the youth talent they used to produce. When they do produce a decent young player, they end up selling them rather than building a good new nucleus of which to build around. So the Tony Hibberts and the Leon Osmonds, who were the last batch of players alongside Wayne Rooney to come through, they're not producing them anymore. Those one club men who stick around, they might go out on loan, but they basically are Everton through and through. They're not producing that kind of mentality and core players anymore. They've got a scattergun transfer policy. They have got no idea who should replace Lampard. I mean, the fact that Lampard was thrown into that mix early on in his managerial career is just ridiculous. I can see Rooney going, I'm not taking this job. I've already had a bad experience with Derby with how that was handled, where I had no money and points deductions. And he even pumped his own money into the team to pay wages. He's going to probably go, you know what, I'm happy in America. I've signed a long term deal here. Bielsa, he's not a manager for a relegation fight, and not with the team that they've got right now. That would be disastrous. So it's got to be Sean Dyche. There's no other option, and even that's a short term fix. And the only reason why they'll go for Sean Dyche, well, two reasons. One, he's worked on a shoestring budget, and I think Everton can't afford to bring players in. They've got to sell. And secondly, he's based in the northwest with his time at Burnley. He's not had a managerial appointment since leaving Burnley in the last season, so he's been. They don't have to pay any money to get him out of a contract. Unlike Wayne Rooney, they would have to pay compensation to DC United in the MLS. So they're constrained by their financial fair play. That's why I think Sean Dyche ends up being the manager. But I don't think the owners have a clue. And a lot of that lies with Bill. Bill Kenwright as well has a huge part to play and a huge responsibility to take in all this mess, in my opinion. He brought Morshy in. He was like, well, I'm going to give up a lot of the funding and control. I'm going to stay involved with the board as a chairman, but I'm going to bring this guy in for a majority stake. So he's the reason why Morshy's there. They've got this expensive stadium they're building, which has been a political issue in Liverpool for a long time. It's led to convictions for fraud and arrests for a fraud investigation and criminal activity around that. There's been some dodgy dealings there, and they're all over the place. They're not the only club badly run, but they are just like the ultimate bonfire right now of disaster. And it's right. The more The owner's willing to spend money. He just doesn't know how to. He just I don't know. They whoever's advising them is doing a bad job. And then you look at in the history of the channel, we look at the managerial changes. That I remember the Ronald Koeman situation when he was out the door, and then Unsworth was involved as interim, and that was a disaster. And then they get Big Sam in, and then they've had Martinez and Silva and Ancelotti and Benitez, and it's just been it's like it's there is I just don't know what to make of it really. Honestly, I don't know what to make of it. Um, they've signed some players on big money that they're paying a lot of money to, massive wages to, um, and and they just don't know what they're doing. I think we can all agree they don't know what they're doing. It is one of those clubs that you're just looking at going, this is makes Leeds United under Peter Ridsdale back in the day look competent, or Portsmouth under Milan Mandridge look competent. This could be a lot worse than those two clubs. This could be disastrous. This really could be disastrous. We've seen some big clubs go down. I mean, people say Nottingham Forest, they're too big a club to get relegated. Obviously, they got relegated back in the day. Blackburn back in the day, winners of the Premier League. Oh, they can't get relegated. We got relegated. But this could be ultimately disaster. This is the worst I've seen a club run in the Premier League ever. And as a Blackburn fan, saying that with the Venky's ownership, we've had some chaotic ownership at times. The Venky's seem to have learnt their lesson. It took them a while, but they seem to have learnt. Let's leave the running of football to the football people. We'll put money in, and obviously and stuff, but let's leave the running of the football to the football. Everton, I don't know what they're doing. Like, yes, you can have money. Go, I want to buy a sports team. That's fine. You've got to make sure that you get the right people advising you. And I don't know who is advising Morshy and Ken. Ken Wright's just. I know he's an Everton fan and he's passionate about the club, but he wanted to keep the club financially going and sustainable and competitive. He's got the wrong investor. So a lot of this, Bill Kenwright's made some bad decisions as well, and this has even been discussed over in the US on NBC because obviously they've got the Premier League rights and they've got Tim Howard as one of their pundits, and he's like, I have no idea how this club is operating. Their transfer policies all over the place. Their scouting, their youth development. Whoever goes into that hot seat managerially, if it is Sean Dyche and he keeps them up by a point, I think that's a successful season. I honestly believe that. I don't think Sean Dyche, with the players that are there right now, it's like an Eddie Howe appointment. Um, but they're constrained by financial fair play. So it's not as if Sean Dyche can come in, keep them up, let's say hypothetically, and can go, right, we're going to have a big spending, I'm going to bring my players in the summer. There's a couple of players there that play for him when he was Burnley manager and Watford, which is fine. But if, let's say, Sean Dyche is appointed and they stay up, let's say they finish 17th, they stay up by a point. I don't think Sean Dyche is going to be able to build a squad that he wants in the summer because of financial fair play. If Wayne Rooney is thrown in there and he keeps them up, hypothetically, because he's already got a managerial gig elsewhere, and that means they've got to pay compensation, which again breach of financial fair play because they've got to get him out of a managerial contract. Let's say he does what he attempted to do at Derby County, and his record at Derby County was actually pretty decent. They would have been a mid-table club last season without a points deduction, and he keeps them up, and they turn things around. He's not going to be able to bring players in really because of financial fair play. Bielsa, he's not going to. That'll be just. So even if they stay up this season, they've got to clear a lot of that squad out. If they get relegated, they have had it because financial fair play, they cannot sign players. They're going to be reliant on their youth system then to bring players in, and they're not producing the talent they used to on the same level. Everton are in trouble. They are in trouble. Uh, whoever the only solution is for Morshy and Ken Wright to find a new owner, a new buyer, and they're denying that in the media. But that is their only solution: is someone to come in, go right, okay, we'll clear the books, get this idiot out. We'll continue committing to the stadium build because they've started now. We've got a budget for that. And even then, who's going to want to come in going, well, you're committed to this infrastructure build, the new stadium. We're constrained on spending, so we can't go into the transfer market. Oh dear. So there's problems there. There's problems there. Everton are in serious, serious trouble. Serious trouble. Um, but we shall see. We shall see how it all plays out. But Everton are in trouble, and that's down to ownership and ownership decisions. And it's not a quick fix. This doesn't get fixed in one or two transfer windows, or narrowly avoiding relegation, or getting relegated. Well, this is a long term situation. Uh, but yeah, I'm well. I'm not an Everton fan um, by any stretch. Um, they are a club in serious, serious crisis right now. And from where they were under Ancelotti finishing eighth to where they are now, I think the warning signs were there before Ancelotti was even hired. I'm surprised he took the job. Um, and I have sympathy for Lampard. I do. Yeah, he signed some of those players he obviously signed off on in the transfer market. Um, how much say does the coach actually have in transfers? Because it seems they're reactionary transfers. Um, but putting a young coach with limited experience in that situation, I don't think was the right idea. I think he's still got to learn his trade. Um, and I think his experience at Chelsea wasn't great, wasn't bad. Could have been better, but he doesn't have the young players to work with that he did at Chelsea and Derby, where he was really good at developing younger players. Um, I wouldn't say Lampard's a bad coach. He's still early on in his managerial career. There's going to be some missteps along the way, but that is the wrong situation to put a young coach in. Are Chelsea getting worse or better? Transition period, new owner. They the situation around Tuchel and his sacking. I know the fans have been chanting, "We want Abramovich back. We want Tuchel back." It's not going to happen. Todd Bowley, there was clearly a breakdown very, very early on in the relationship between Tuchel and Todd Bowley, and we don't know the full reasons behind that. I know that there are those within the sport that do know the reasons. So in the fullness of time, we might find out why um, they moved on from Tuchel. But Tuchel was a very short shelf manager, really short shelf life. He doesn't last long in jobs because his methods um, are prickly. Basically, he's got that kind of personality where look at PSG and Dortmund. He wasn't there very long for either club. He had success at both clubs. He wasn't there very long. Yes, he had success at Chelsea. Wasn't there very long. And he's out the door. So clearly, the relationship there was obviously they started off on the right foot, but very very quickly it was very clear that okay, this isn't working. Why they went for Graham Potter, I don't know. But Brighton are doing better since he's moved on, and Chelsea have gone backwards since he's arrived. So, but there are other reasons at play, like even going back to the Abramovich era, in relation to their transfer and youth policy, that have finally caught up with Chelsea. It's finally caught up with Chelsea. Their transfer and youth policy it's finally caught up with them now. Don't get me wrong, Chelsea have got some fantastic players. They've always had fantastic players, at least in my lifetime. Um, they have been one of the most successful clubs in my lifetime in English football, if not the most successful. For the amount of silverware they've won, I've done the club history video, for example. You can look at it, and you can see how many trophies they won before the Abramovich era, and during the Abramovich era. Now it's the post Abramovich era. They got battered in the FA Cup third round by a Man City side that aren't at their best. They got hammered. Um, they're out the League Cup. Their only hope is to win European silverware this season. Is Graham Potter the guy to do it? Will there be squad turnover? I think there's going to be squad changes. I think you have to give Graham Potter a full off season and a full season in charge to really understand if he's the right guy and if this is the direction you want to take the team. Um, but a new owner, the owner's a very expectant owner. Um, he comes from a background of where his teams have won in Major League Baseball, so there's expectation there. There's the expectation that they will be competing for silverware every season, making finals, competing for the league until the last couple of weeks of the season, if not winning it. And they're 10th. And the teams around them have got better. The teams above them have got better or have been more consistent. But they've changed manager this season. And which team in the top five leagues is the worst first place right now? I couldn't tell you that because I would say each league has its own challenges. Um, I would say probably France would be uh, a cheeky, sly one. I would say France maybe the obvious answer, but in reality, um, obviously, each league is different, has its own challenges and expectations of fan base, and so we'll have to see with that one. I couldn't tell you, but we'll see what happens. The transfer window still got Arsenal, Barcelona, Bayern, Napoli up here. I would say Bayern Munich are looking a little bit more human this season. PSG, it's PSG, isn't it? And their league is the least competitive for like the gap between first and second. I think is what you really want to look at. Napoli are doing really well in Serie A. That's really shaken things up. And the Juventus's points deduction. I know we haven't really mentioned it today, but it has been mentioned before. There are serious questions about the integrity of the sport in Italy that have raised their ugly head again. Um, but Napoli on course for their first title in how many years? I think that's a good thing for Italian football that Inter, AC, and now Napoli winning their first titles in a very long time. And if Napoli continue this and they're the third team to break their title drought, and it's all and you look at Juventus and you're going, hang on a second, things are going wrong here. Things are happening now. I think it's refreshing that there are new teams and even old teams that have been at the top back at the top. Um, but yeah, um, Juventus are in trouble, and there's going to be huge question marks over the culture of that football club. And 3 seasons in a row without Juve being champions. That's a good thing. That is a good thing. Historically, you go back to the 60s and 70s, it was Inter that was doing what Juventus have done recently and winning all the time. The Grande Inter side of the 60s and 70s, only Cagliari really stopped that. Um, but I think it's a good thing for Italian club football that Juventus isn't winning all the time. It's a bad thing about the reasons why Juventus aren't in the top three, top four at the moment, and not competing for the title because of what they've been accused of doing. But then other clubs are involved in this as well. So this is not just a Juventus transfer accountancy scandal. It does involve other clubs in Italy, and that raises questions about the entirety of the European transfer market and the finances of every league and club in Europe because they're all interlinked. They're all intertwined. These transfers and agents' fees and club finances. And so questions have been raised on multiple occasions. Roma could do it. Anything's possible with Mourinho at the helm. Um, you know, and the direction Roma are taking. They've got foreign overseas money involved, so it's not Italian money; it's foreign money involved. I believe it's American money actually. So Roma, it's possible that Roma could upset the apple cart a little bit and get back to being the top dogs for the first time in two and a half decades at the top, which would be fantastic as well. I think we can all agree that would be a good shot in the arm for Italian football. And yeah, Lazio as well. I mean, it's vitally important. And I could do videos on the history of the Italian league. I should do more videos on Italian clubs. It is vitally important to look at the fact that Juventus dominant, and this is going to probably happen to Bayern. It will happen to PSG at some point because of the new spending rules that will be brought in, and the legacy coefficient for the Champions League. So Marseille will be like, oh, hello. And AS Monaco will be like, well, we've made a Champions League final, hello. And historically, they're very successful clubs. So we will see a changing of the guard in the European leagues at some point. I think Bayern are starting to look a bit more human. Juventus have been found out to be on the take again, and had some very creative accounting over the years, and it's caught up with them again, and that's eroded the trust within the sport in Italy yet further. And if you do read any sports publications like the Athletic and the Gazzetta dello Sport and anything like that, any kind of sports based news publication, website or newspaper, um, when you see negative headlines like and the same things happening time and time again, the question does get raised about the culture and the integrity and the transparency, and then the fans lose trust. We're already seeing it in English football with fans losing trust with the Football League, the Premier League, and the FA, with regulation over how when clubs go bust and badly run clubs like Everton are right now, like Derby were last year. In their situations, the Bury situation. And now we're seeing it in Italian football where the fans are again questioning the integrity of one of the biggest national sports and the integrity of the sport. And there's a reason why Italian football has struggled in the last decade and a half since they won the World Cup in 2006. Yes, they won the Euros, but there's a reason why Italian clubs have struggled. There's a reason why the sport has struggled in Italy. And that's because of the last corruption scandal. There's another corruption scandal. Fans are losing confidence in the institutions of the Italian FA, in the institutions of the Italian league system, and the Italian clubs. And yes, Juventus is the catalyst for this one, but the next corruption scandal could be another club. And when do I think Dortmund will challenge again for the Bundesliga? I'm not sure it'll be Dortmund who'll be the next challenger to Bayern Munich, who wins the next Bundesliga that isn't called Bayern Munich. Um, I don't know. It all depends how long Bayern dominance lasts, and then what happens when Bayern stop being dominant. And you know, Union Berlin have given it a good go this season. Hoffenheim are another one. There's the Wolfsburg have given it a go in the past. We'll have to wait and see on that one. Is my answer. Leipzig could be, yeah, possibly. Frankfurt, I think Frankfurt are probably the best positioned right now for a little spell at the top. But Dortmund will still be there. They're still always competitive. They're always in the European places. They're never outside the top five, top six in Germany. Really, they're a very consistent side, very competitive side. It just so happens that Bayern have been dominant for a very long time. That won't last. And when it does happen, there are a whole load of clubs that will be clamouring to get hold of the Bundesliga and win, and I think that will be a good thing. If Leipzig win, I think that's possibly a bad thing for the German game with their ownership model. But we will see what happens, and we will see how it plays out. But I think Frankfurt, I think they're the next club on the rank at the moment in the German game. But we'll have to see how it plays out. We'll have to see how things play out, who finishes where, and I'll have to have a look at the current Bundesliga table when the transfer window closes, and just have a little look to see who's where and what clubs are doing what, and I'll have to do some more German club histories as well because there's some very interesting clubs in the Bundesliga right now and some very interesting histories to look at. Yeah, Wolfsburg are always don't discount Wolfsburg. They've had a very decent spell lately. I'm not really a massive fan of Bayern Munich. I like to see other clubs do well. I do like Borussia Dortmund. I'm not going to lie. I like to see like Bayer Leverkusen. I like to see them do well. Werder Bremen. I like to see them do well. So I like to see the German clubs do well that aren't called Bayern Munich. I think Bayern Munich have been too dominant for the health of the game. I understand that they're well run. I understand that they've got good pathways, good youth system, good structures, and so they deserve to be successful. But at the same time, I think it's having a negative impact on the rest of the Bundesliga and the German national side. I've done my video discussing is Bayern Munich's dominance hurting the German national team? I think it is, but I do think like Frankfurt look promising. Wolfsburg have got a decent setup. Um, Hoffenheim look decent. Stuttgart have always got a good history in the sport. Werder Bremen have had a response. So no, I don't like PSG. I never have liked PSG. Never really been a fan of PSG. And there are other more historical French clubs that I think are hindered by PSG's financial doping. The best way I could describe PSG's finances is financial doping. You know, the fact that Lille won the league, considering how much money PSG have got, was fantastic a couple of years ago. Fantastic. Um, and it cost Pochettino his job in reality, which was fantastic as well, because yay. But in reality, jokes aside, I'm not a fan of the financial doping of clubs. And I will say this about Newcastle. Yes, they deserved better owners who were more committed to making the club successful. PSG, Man City, and Newcastle, they um, distorted the game. Five best club teams. Bayern Munich will still be one of the five best club teams because they're so well run. I would say the Liverpool and Man City teams in the last 5 years are up there. And I would say it's pretty difficult actually, but I would also argue a few other bits and pieces. Who's this? Right, I've got to go. Bye for now. Hello. I'm all right. I've had better days. I felt better.